This is the second meeting of the Audit Committee. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Welcome to the second meeting of the Audit Committee. Before we begin, I wanted to take a moment to recognize a milestone. I know members of the audit team, but not all the staff or the committee members would know that it's a turning point for one of our assistant auditor generals. I just want to take a moment to recognize that this is the last meeting for Jane. And with that, I'm going to just turn the microphone over to Beverly and take a moment to recognize somebody.
Good morning. It's with happiness and with sadness that we bid goodbye to Jane. I'm happy because she's moving on with a great part of her life to spend time with her husband, traveling to Hong Kong, Ireland. There's many trips coming up. But it's with sadness because Jane is a leader, and she's been a leader in our organization for since I've been there for the last 4.5 years. She brings value not only in the work that she does, but also in the leadership that she shows and how she grows her staff and how we work together. We've had incredible experiences. Some of the projects she's been involved with included the TCHC for Evasion, some of the reports that are here today around the tree maintenance and the vehicle audit. So she is finishing, this is her last audit committee, but as she moves on, she's leaving a legacy of people in behind her who are going to continue to carry the torch. So with that, I'd like to present just a small token of appreciation, because it is her last audit committee. And we also have a beautiful scroll here from the mayor and from the chair of the audit committee. Jane? So
while Jane comes up, I'll hold it up, but I'll read it. Mayor John Tory and members of Toronto City Council extend sincere appreciation and congratulations to Jane Ying, Auditor General's Office, on your retirement after 31 years of service. Toronto enjoys the status of being one of the world's leading urban communities thanks to the high caliber of hard-working employees committed to public service. We thank you for a job well done and offer our best wishes for a long, happy, and healthy retirement. And I think I can speak on behalf of my colleagues on the committee and on council. And maybe even personally, Jane is one of the first people that I encountered joining the audit committee. She's been a real pleasure to work with, incredibly capable person, but has done a tremendous public service. Audits are not always flashy in the news. Sometimes they're quiet, but they're important. They, of course, save money. That's a good thing. But they also empower the management team to make changes that they need to do in the Toronto Public Service. And most important, they increase citizens, Torontonians, confidence in their government, in their public service. And that's immeasurable, but it's incredibly important. So I guess on behalf of the committee, we really thank you for the work you've done, and we want to wish you well in your next chapter in life. Thanks.
Oh, sure.
Somebody snap a picture?
Here we go.
Oh, Josie's. Okay. Let's get the Toronto in the back. There you go. Take my glasses off. I'll send it to you. Thank you. All right, as we have quorum present, I'll call this meeting to order. We acknowledge that the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. At this time, I'll ask if there's any declarations of interest. Please indicate the item number and the nature of the interest. Also take a moment, should committee members identify an interest, please remember to use the forms. You can ask the city clerk for one of those. I will now take a motion to confirm the Audit Committee minutes from February 22nd, 2019. Councillor Matlow, all of those in favor, and that is carried. We have 8 items on the agenda. Let's go through the items. AU 2.1, moving forward together, opportunities to address broader city priorities in Toronto Community Housing Corporation revitalizations. I have a note here that there's a presentation, and so that item will be held. AU 2.2, Fleet Services Operational Review, Phase 1, lengthy downtime requires immediate attention. And I also have a note that we have a combined presentation on item AU 2.3. And with the committee's indulgence, I hope we can consider both of those items together. So both will be held, and I'll read the item 2.3, the second number. Fleet Services Operational Review, Phase 1, stronger corporate oversight needed for underutilized vehicles. AU 2.4, we also have a short presentation and therefore we'll hold it, but the item is Review of Urban Forestry Ensuring Value for Money for Tree Maintenance Services. AU 2.5, Toronto Transit Commission Auditor General's Review of Toronto Transit Commission's Revenue Operations Phase 1 Fare Evasion and Fare Inspection. We do have a short presentation, and I'm going to just check with the Audit Committee if there's a desire to see the presentation. So the committee is indicating we don't require it. However, I did have a request to hold that item.
Well, yes, I have a lot of questions.
Councillor Nunziata, I'm happy to hold that item in your name. AU 2.6, Auditor General's response to the Audit Committee's request on the outstanding audit recommendations which are of greatest concern. I'm going to suggest that we hold, Councillor Ford, you want to hold that item? Thank you. AU 2.7, Auditor General's 2019 Status Report on Outstanding Audit Recommendations for Divisions in Community and Social Services and the City Manager's Office. Are there any interests in that item? Seeing none. A motion from Councillor Nunziata to move the recommendations. All of those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. AU 2.8, Toronto Transit Commission, PricewaterhouseCoopers 2017 Management Letter Follow-Up Report. Are there any questions or interest in that matter? Seeing none, may I have a motion to adopt, that we consult with the clerk. Are we receiving the item? May I have a motion to receive the item? Councillor Ford, all of those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. Okay. Back up to the top on AU 2.1, I note that we do have speakers for that. However, okay. So we'll follow the convention and invite the speakers up to speak prior to the presentation. I have 2 representatives from East York Acorn, Alejandra Ruiz Vargas and Kelly Lalande. Is Alejandra and Kelly here? Okay. All right, with that, then I'll suggest that we move on to the presentation.
So, thank you, Chair. I have presented before the Audit Committee of TCHC on this report, Moving Forward Together, Opportunities to Address Broader City Priorities in TCHC Revitalizations. And I've also presented before the board. So in growing my team, I'm going to kindly ask Assistant Auditor General Aina Chan to present, and I'm going to ask the senior manager of the team, Patricia Lee, to present, and Elaine Liu was also an audit manager on this project. And then I'll join them for questions afterwards. So Aina?
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of Audit Committee. With me is the project lead, Patricia Lee. In this presentation, we'll give you a quick overview of the audit report, including background, audit objectives and scope, the key audit findings, and then we'll recap with how to move forward together. I did want to highlight that the TCHC board considered this report at its meeting on Monday and approved all 12 recommendations directed to TCHC.
So by way of background, TCHC's mandate and focus is to maintain its buildings in a state of good repair. However, it faces serious challenges. TCHC's 2,100 buildings are, on average, over 40 years old. Because of funding pressures, the backlog of building repair requirements has continued to grow over time. This is where revitalizations come in. Revitalizations aim to generate revenue from the sale of lands to pay for revitalization, reduce the repair backlog, and create economic opportunities through jobs, training opportunities, scholarships for tenants, and boost to the local economy. TCHC has 6 revitalization projects with construction underway and is moving forward with 2 new projects. In our audit, we reviewed a sample of revitalization phases underway within projects at Regent Park, Alexandra Park, and Lawrence Heights. These 3 communities are the 3 largest communities being redeveloped by both land size and number of units affected. They cover 85% of the 4,800 rent geared to income units that are being replaced, renovated, or repaired through ongoing revitalizations.
This audit is the first of a planned series of audits related to housing, TCHC being the provider of a significant number of subsidized housing, affordable rental housing, and market rental housing, and the revitalizations also creating affordable home ownership and market home ownership opportunities. The Auditor General also has ongoing and upcoming audits in areas that directly impact other areas of the housing continuum. These audits are timely because the city is developing its Housing Opportunities Toronto Action Plan for the next decade. The objective of this audit of TCHC's revitalization program was to answer 3 key questions. Is there an appropriate framework in place for getting the best outcomes out of redevelopment of TCHC communities? Is TCHC achieving its intended outcomes for these revitalizations? And are there any lessons learned for future phases of revitalizations related to selecting development partners? So TCHC revitalization initiatives are a significant undertaking, and they offer the chance to plan and build a community from the ground up. Our report focuses on the lessons learned for TCHC and the city to continue to move forward together to address broader city priorities through revitalizations. There's 3 broad themes in our report. The first theme, the city has an opportunity to advance its key priorities through TCHC site redevelopment. As an example, our report highlights revitalizations as an opportunity to increase the supply of affordable housing. To address affordable housing and city building objectives, the city and TCHC must strategically align its priorities, and a coordinated funding plan needs to be in place to support achievement of outcomes. The second theme is that given the significant financial pressures that TCHC faces, management must bring the right information at the right time to City Council in a transparent manner that supports accountability and oversight. This includes information on expected outcomes and a long-term financial plan. This report raises the visibility of the funding required with the remaining phases of existing projects where there are known shortfalls. And the third theme is that TCHC can further enhance its processes and controls related to selecting its development partners. We've seen TCHC improving this over time, but there are some lessons for continuous improvement. So we're going to go through each theme in a little bit more detail. Section A of the report focuses on the support the city provides to TCHC. Historically, the city has expected TCHC to largely fund revitalizations itself, but it has been challenging for TCHC to balance its multiple priorities, its responsibilities to maintain the buildings, local ward priorities, city building objectives to create new affordable housing, all within its funding constraints. Its primary focus for the revitalizations is delivering its mandate to maintain its buildings in a state of good repair. However, there are opportunities to think more holistically while delivering on the mandate. Successfully addressing city building objectives through site redevelopment requires a broader, more integrated approach to identify which priorities can be addressed, What are the desired outcomes? How will those priorities be funded? And how will the projects be measured and evaluated? To effectively support TCHC in the redevelopment of its sites, the city should play a key role in helping to set the priorities that will be addressed and developing the coordinated long-term plan to fund those priorities. We noted that most revitalization projects were meant to be self-financing, funded in large part by proceeds from the sale of lands and profit sharing, but there are still shortfalls on TCHC's two largest projects. Achieving desired outcomes and advancing city building priorities for the city as a whole requires more funding than TCHC has. A coordinated financial framework would enable the city to better support the redevelopment of TCHC sites. So an example of the opportunity to address city building in revitalizations is to strategically address the city's housing supply challenges, specifically the priority to increase affordable housing. 645 net new affordable units will be built as part of these revitalizations, the vast majority in Regent Park. However, very little new affordable housing has been created in the other 5 revitalizations. And at this time, there's no additional commitments for including additional affordable housing in future phases of these revitalizations. The lack of additional capital funding from the city or other sources is one reason that TCHC has not included more affordable housing in the current revitalizations. Furthermore, addressing housing supply challenges through the revitalizations may have cost-benefit impacts. For example, increasing affordable housing may impact density available for other uses, capital and ongoing operating funding requirements, and other local and citywide planning priorities. So while our audit looked at the extent of affordable housing in TCHC revitalizations, this raised the opportunity where the city can act to advance its priority as part of the revitalizations, as well as more widely on other developments. There are 3 key things that we recommended to be considered. The city should assess what are cost-effective ways to expand affordable housing. The city should apply the city's official plan requirements to prioritize affordable housing, and the city should consider how it may incentivize developers to include more affordable housing. Briefly on each of these 3. So first, to assess what are cost-effective ways to expand affordable housing, we recommended the city compare whether it's more efficient and cost-effective for the city to construct and operate additional affordable units within TCHC redevelopment sites versus other options that may be available. In assessing, cities should consider both the cost to construct and any ongoing net operating income or costs to the city and TCHC. Second, the city's official plan includes requirements for affordable housing as a first priority in large developments. In the graph, you can see that for Regent Park, Lawrence Heights, and Alexandra Park, if the official plan requirements that 20% of additional residential units on new development be new affordable housing, the amount of new affordable housing created would be significant. However, amendments were made so that in all cases, no new units were required under the policy for TCHC large sites. Of the affordable units that are being developed, none of them were a result of the application of this large sites policy. This is an observation not just on TCHC sites, but across the city, there is limited application of the large sites policy. Our report recommends a review of the current policy to make it more effective. And thirdly, the city should consider how it may incentivize developers to include affordable housing and consider the financial implications of it. Examples may be accepting lower than market value, allowing more density, or imposing fees. However, the report does note there may be direct and indirect costs from using these incentives. So the goal of the recommendations is for all stakeholders to think as one city, needing to have coordinated plans to achieve priorities. Where the city takes action to evaluate ways to advance affordable housing, it's a win-win for the city and TCHC, as it can inform how and when to include additional affordable housing in TCHC developments. It's important to take a holistic look at revitalizations to see what can be done that may have an overall benefit to the city, to see what makes sense to include, and to highlight the funding that is needed to address it. In looking at revitalizations as an opportunity to address city building, it's important to recognize that as TCHC currently moves forward with its own development activities independently of CREATE-TO, CreateTO was formed to apply a citywide lens to ensure development of city real estate assets that includes a balance of community and economic benefits. CreateTO is tasked with advancing the Housing Now initiative to develop significant affordable housing on 11 city sites. There are synergies and learnings that both organizations will have in creating affordable housing in mixed-income, mixed-use communities. Our recommendations are to increase collaboration on practices and approaches to development and city building. The goal is to improve the function of both organizations and to look for areas where they can look to work together on a more integrated basis. And the slide includes some areas, suggestions, and examples.
Section B of our report highlights key steps that TCHC management can take to better demonstrate to the City Council and members of the public its overall adherence to strategic direction and principles for revitalizations, each revitalization's progress, and any future requirements and challenges. Firstly, when deciding revitalization priorities and establishing funding strategies, TCHC and the city should work together to create a formal development strategy and establish ways to measure the outcomes for the city as a whole in terms of both financial and non-financial impacts. Secondly, to support oversight and accountability, it is important for TCHC to highlight each revitalization's progress and bring to light the positive outcomes in a clear and transparent way, and at the same time, identify the opportunities to improve upon those outcomes in the short, medium, and long terms. We recommended clarifying the shareholder direction with respect to requirements related to the city's approval and ongoing oversight of revitalizations, and requirements for reporting the progress and the outcomes achieved to date on a phase-by-phase basis. As indicated in city management's response to our recommendation, the city has put forth a new approvals framework for TCHC revitalization projects, which was considered at the Planning and Housing Committee April 30th meeting earlier this week. Additionally, TCHC management agrees with our recommendations and intends to improve reporting on outcomes, beginning with Regent Park Phase 2 and Alexandra Park Phase 1. Thirdly, in our report, we highlight the significant financial pressures TCHC is facing and raise the visibility of the funding required from City Council and others. To support the long-term financial planning for both the TCHC and the City Council should have transparent and timely information about revitalization activities and any future funding requirements and challenges. Our findings and recommendations highlight that the city's capital plan should reflect the total capital costs and funding required from the city for these revitalizations, and that more frequent reporting of life-to-date financial information and projected capital project costs is needed. Regent Park is such an example. This figure on this slide shows the various points in time at which the growing funding shortfall for Regent Park revitalization was reported to Council. Initially, in 2003, when City Council first approved the multi-phase revitalization, it was already known that it would be not self-financing. Over the years, however, TCHC only reported to City Council at infrequent intervals on the growing shortfall in funding for Regent Park. TCHC staff did report to the board in 2014 that a significant funding shortfall to complete Phase 3 was expected, and also communicated these funding needs to the city's chief financial officer around the same time. But it would be 3 more years before an updated estimate was reported to City Council in 2017. This was the only instance we found where City Council was provided with life-to-date financial information for a particular revitalization project. So this example highlights the need for additional annual reporting on major projects, especially on TCHC's multi-year, multi-phase revitalizations, because they have significant financial, social, and economic impacts that span many years. And not only can reporting to Council be enhanced, we also made recommendations for TCHC to enhance reporting to its board so that the board has a consolidated view of all project costs for a more complete decision-making at the outset of the project and/or phase, as well as when circumstances change. And the last section of our report includes findings and recommendations that will help TCHC further enhance its processes and controls for selecting its development partners. For example, implementing formal negotiation protocols, using a robust financial model to evaluate business terms, using certified appraisals for land valuation, and developing formal policies specific to real estate transactions. As already noted, TCHC has made continuous improvements in certain of these processes over time, but our recommendations will help reinforce consistent application of processes and retention of documentation to support decision-making.
So in conclusion, our report includes 23 recommendations, 11 to the city and 12 directed to TCHC to move forward together to achieve broader city building objectives and improve accountability for outcomes of the revitalization. Having a citywide lens and an integrated approach is a win-win for the city and TCHC. TCHC and city management have agreed to all recommendations and have already taken steps to start implementing.
To summarize the themes that I think are really important here, it's really opening the conversation to coordinate the opportunities in a more concrete manner, and to keep that conversation front and center, not only at the board, but also at council. And I'd like to thank my team, and I'd like to thank TCHC for the work that they've put into this project. I'm going to go answer some questions.
Thank you to the audit team. Now, the clerk has informed me that the registered speakers are available, and I've also received a request from Mr. Avila Velarde to change the topic that he wants to speak on from 2.3 to 2.1. So I'll ask for the consent of the committee to vary the procedure. Are there any objections to that? Okay, so with that, I'll invite, and I'll ask the staff to make the podium available. I'll invite representatives from East York Acorn, Alejandra Ruiz Vargas, and Kelly Lalande. If you're available here, I understand. Welcome to the Audit Committee. You have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Well, when I started to depute, I didn't need glasses, but now I need glasses. And the problem doesn't change. Still, the housing is still the same. So revitalization is a big word and a big opportunity as well. It's always great to see great new things, but the revitalization of TCHC is one of them. Let me tell you first that I am only a face for Acorn. We are 46,000 people at low income and moderate income of the city, from Etobicoke, Scarborough, St. Jamestown, East York, Finch and Jane, and George Weston. So I only have face, but we are suffering from the same problem, the lack of housing. And now with this revitalization, that is great, because somehow the government or the city needs to find a way to replace the existing units. It's a deal that is very poor, and we can do better. So what is not okay, the revitalization is good, isn't it? But what is not okay is that we're giving our lands away without not taking advantage of the deal. We agree that somehow the city needs to repair the existing units, but the deal that the municipality is proposing is far poor in our benefit, and I mean the people of the city. The other thing that we have to consider is that the word revitalization means, based on the Merriam-Webster dictionary, to give new life or vigor, to rejuvenate, to renew, to repair, to restore, to revive. But really, what we are doing in the community is that we are taking people from their community, placing them in another community, rearranging their lives, and plus we are encouraging gentrification. And we are encouraging landlords to rent increases. This deal so far no benefit us much, because what we are doing with one hand, we are destroying with the other hand. Our proposal is that in every city land, every development should have 50% of affordable housing. Probably this can change, but right now we need this 50% because we are in a crisis. And I know you have been lectured or that, but we need to sing in the same song because nothing has been changed, or minimum. And don't take this personal, because I really like all the councilors and all the government, and it's not about being personal, it's about that you are elected officials and you need to fight for us, because if we will be your child, comparing Toronto as a child, we are drowning. And so this is child abuse. Why the city do these deals that only benefit some families in the Bay Street? Since when money is more important than people? Why the city representatives who can do the changes are always saying we cannot do that? This has been the speech where we speak with some officials that they cannot do that they want to do it right. Well, let me tell you that you fail to ask the people. So if you really want to do something, be bold and do a change for a while. If it doesn't work, at least the people will see that you fight for us. And the last piece is the developers have bleed this city how much? How much blood they need from us? How many people needs to be dead? So developers, this is a message very clear to developers. Developers in this city, they are immoral. It's the time to change. It's the time to share. And the city would like to save money because this is the other speech that we have been hearing, that they want to save money. They should invest in housing, and the policing prices, the policing expenses will be less, and the health will be less. I'm coming from a city that is called Bogota, that has been changing so much because housing, because the gentrification, and this was part of the violence. And you can Google it, and you can search. And I came here looking for a better opportunity to be in peace and to thrive. But now my child will never can be able to find a place or can find a house if we still with this pace that we go. And you ask my members of the ACOR, it's the same situation. So thank you so much.
Thank you. There are questions. I'll ask Councillor Fletcher as a guest member of council if he had questions first. Thank you. Councillor Matlow.
You talked about the need for government to be able to demand that there be inclusionary zoning, that there be a substantive number of affordable units built. I would imagine, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you would also submit that with those affordable units, there should be parks and affordable childcare and school spaces and infrastructure and all those things to support the quality of life of those residents. Would you and Acorn join us in demanding that the provincial government, rather than remove the ability of City Hall to focus on the community needs and to make the city affordable and bring back the OMB rules, fight to actually strengthen City Hall's ability to have a community focus and to contextualize the planning process so that we can build affordable housing, that we can build quality communities, and we could actually have more control in our communities and at City Hall over the land use planning process?
Well, we totally agree. We read today what happened with the OMB, the new rules, and this is something that we totally support because the Ontario, the province are doing something that is not going to benefit the city at all. It's going to benefit the developers, and we don't have nothing against the developers. It's good to be rich, isn't it? but we need leverage. We need some support because, as you say, we cannot create a law that is going to increase the housing, but not the affordability piece. And what you say, daycares, and all the things that the community supports or needs. So yes, we support that for sure.
May I ask you, thank you, no, I appreciate your support, and may I ask you, along with specifically addressing our social housing needs that the city will own and run through the corporation. This also affects the affordability of our entire city. If in one way the government is saying that they want more units built, but then at the same time they have withdrawn all rent controls, all guidelines for any new units, would you agree that along with the social housing that we will have as a city, in the private market, new units also need to have guidelines and rent controls so that they be affordable for young people and seniors and young families and everyone in between.
We totally agree. This is going to create more chaos if we don't put the guidelines for every unit that is created in the city.
Thank you.
Thanks to you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Matlow. Are there any other questions? Seeing none, thank you for speaking to us. Our next speaker is Miguel Villavelarde. Good morning, Miguel.
Good morning.
You've got 5 minutes.
All right, here I am. So thank you very, very much for the opportunity to switch my deputation to AU 2.1. Last Monday, this past Monday, there was a TCHC board meeting, which I was in attendance. I saw our city auditor, Beverly Romeo, in attendance, and her staff. Good morning to you, by the way. Of all the recommendations that our city auditor emphasized, very objective, the issue of oversight, accountability, and transparency. We have noticed that for 10 years as an activist, how money has been misspent at Toronto Community Housing. When we talk about the revitalization of Regent Park, there's one particular item that really is very close to my heart in the issue of safety. I don't mean about hiring more community safety unit officers or more police. I am more into having more cameras installed at buildings in revitalization of Regent Park. They're missing, especially on phase 1, 2. Phase 3, they have good cameras installed all across the new buildings owned by TCHC, but definitely phase 2 cameras are totally missing on the upper floors. And I had a great opportunity to speak this at police board meeting, and the police board meeting agreed to send Councilor Michael Ford and all the members of the board to tour the buildings of Operating Unit M, where I live, in Regent Park, and they were witness to see that they were missing cameras on the upper floors. So if we want to ensure there is a good revitalization program for the other phases of coming up down the pipeline, like Lawrence Park and all these nice projects coming up, I think we should have implementing programs that address these concerns. And you know what is really detrimental is to hear about 3 weeks ago, we have a community update on the revitalization of Regent Park. And I asked the question to, through my councilor, Christine Wontan, who is present here, I believe. I don't see her today. And I asked to the members of the staff, when are you going to address those missing cameras at 230 Sackville Avenue, where they're missing? And the answer I received was, you know, Miguel, we're going to have to review this for the next budget cycle. I don't think we cannot wait for that to happen. I mean, lives are at stake. Security of our seniors is important. The security of our children, our youth. You remember that someone was killed and murdered at 230 Sackville, and that has not been resolved because there were no cameras on the 8th floor. So the other issue I want to bring to your attention is oversight for the community safety unit officers. I got a chance and opportunity to walk my dog at Cherry Beach. Cherry Beach is nowhere near a Toronto Community Housing building, as you can see in the picture. And I have another picture to show of the close-up of this vehicle. Do you know that how bad is the road to lead to the beach? It's bad for your trouts. It's bad for your springs. It's bad for the undercarriage of your vehicle. And we have to be good stewards of our vehicles. So by taking a break, that's the answer I received from the community safety unit chief, is that they were having a break at Cherry Beach, but he said they were available by radio in case of an emergency. You know, I think It's about a kilometer away from Regent Park. If there was an emergency, I think they were far away to get anywhere closer. The other issue, I was told that they were also doing paperwork. So, you know, I don't have a problem with staff having a break. I mean, they have the legal entitlement to have the break. Why don't they take a break on the buildings that they supposedly to be protecting? We have lunch rooms for the staff. Maybe we can suggest TCHC to have those community safety unit officers, instead of going to Cherry Beach and waste taxpayers' money, why don't you just use the lunch rooms or hang out at Regent Park where I live? Thank you.
Thank you, Miguel. Are there any questions of the speaker? Seeing none, thank you for speaking to us today.
You're very welcome, sir.
With that, questions for staff by members of council? Councillor Fletcher?
Thank you. Very nice to be here in your committee this morning, Mr. Chair. I'm just going to go to item number 1, which is the recommendation 1 in your report. And it is planning approvals. It says phases that have yet to obtain planning approvals and shareholder consent. So that would essentially be something that's not yet really started. Your expectation would be there would be a discussion with TCHC. I'm looking at your report, perhaps create TO, and then somebody at the city, and I'm unclear who that is, but that would be your expectation. Prior to advancing or saying, here's what we're doing, that whether or not affordable housing can be accommodated or how much could be built there should be determined before everything gets out of the gate. That's my understanding of
You are
your
correct.
number 1.
You are correct.
And when I'm looking at the nature of the shareholder consent, would you expect that would be something that would be a little more formal to the city rather than a large report, something with many different things in it, and somewhere in there is revitalization? I'm kind of getting the impression that if you're going to do a revitalization, let's have everything up front, know what you're doing. Everybody's signed off that ticked all the boxes as to what can or cannot be accomplished, as well as the financing.
That is correct. The focus of the report was to make sure everybody's on the same page, so it's important to take a pause to identify the opportunities, to open the conversation, and leverage any opportunities you can to move forward the city priorities.
And where does the planning approval for or let's say the overall approval for the revitalization, which committee is it currently going to at City Council? Where is it?
I don't know, I don't know,
Okay,
I'm
if
not
you
sure,
don't
maybe
know.
that's for staff, maybe that's for TCHC.
It's okay. Behind me? Oh, behind me. Oh, going to the executive. Thank you very much. And then I'm just interested in the Affordable Housing Office role here. Was this sign-off that you had from the city, was that from the Affordable Housing? What role do you expect the Affordable Housing Office to play? We have Create TO, and we have TCHC, and we have the Affordable Housing Office here that actually has oversight over where all large amounts of money are for building new housing. Are you expecting they're going to be involved in some fundamental way, or which city department is the city manager, deputy, Affordable Housing Office? Did you give a thought to that, or is that something that we still should be figuring out at our end here?
My recommendation is that all be at the table. We had sign-off from each of the areas on the recommendations. And it's important that affordable housing be there to identify not only the need, but the funding opportunities, because TCHC has some assets, including land and buildings. Affordable housing does need housing. There's a priority there. They may have some funding. Together, the whole may be better than the sum of its parts.
Okay. And did you have a chance to research how the affordable housing units at Regent Park were added onto that development?
I'll turn that to Ina. We have.
When and
we have
where
done
and
some work.
how?
She has the detail with her.
Okay.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So when the planning reports came to, before the community councils, or the planning reports came, they had, because it's a large site, they had made, indicated that the large sites policy would not be applied because there were financial challenges, and then community council recommended identifying sites and funding and asked for a report back.
Yes, so it was Toronto and East York Community Council that added the affordable housing. And that's a fairly large site. It's 69 acres, so, but it didn't quite make the number of affordable housing units that would be expected on such a large site. Lawrence Heights is a 100-acre site, and I see there's 3 affordable ownership units there. Is there, does your report intend that for us to go back, or for the city or for the staff to go back and look at what opportunities there would be on such a large site of 100 acres to increase the number of affordable housing units, and how to do that? I understand the how is pretty important, but at least having a goal.
Last question will go.
I'm sorry, that's my last question.
Yes.
And I'll just intercede here. We can do a second round if you wish.
It's okay.
All right, thank
I
you.
may have more after.
All right.
So your question was, is my intention to go, for the various TCHC affordable housing, the various groups to go back and rethink to see if there's an opportunity to grow affordable housing, leveraging TCHC, leveraging funding that's available, leveraging expertise of Creatio, and then to move forward. That is my recommendation. It's really for City Council to set the expectation of management.
Okay, I may have a second round. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And through you to the Auditor General, once again, I think I'm very repetitive in this committee. Thank you very much for a very detailed report. So throughout your audit with Toronto Community Housing, just very generally, and I think Councillor Fletcher just alluded to this a bit off the top of her questions, but what was the relationship like with Toronto Community Housing throughout the audit? And coming to your recommendations, were they well received with management?
I think that it's a relationship going forward. I believe everything has been accepted by management. I guess where my hesitation is in that I think everybody's pausing and thinking that there might be a different and perhaps a better way forward. So I think it just takes some education on the way, and that's kind of what I saw during the audit, and I can say that management is fully on board, and I'm looking forward to moving forward.
Okay, excellent. My second question is, you mentioned that this is the first a series of audits that will be coming forward. What other audits, or I guess category of audits, are we going to expect, and when?
So on Monday, we'll be launching the start of the property management audit. Also, we'll be doing work on vendor management. We are currently underway. We have rent geared to income, and we're doing a shelter audit. We have a waitlist audit underway. We may come back and do the construction management around some of the TCHC sites, including revitalizations. That's a few that are in the hopper or planned and underway.
So with that being said, and I think the value that your office brings to the city and to bring to Toronto Community Housing is of significant help. One of the things the city has undertaken is, of course, the Tenants First project, and just a few months ago, we passed a motion at City Council about a governance review of Toronto Community Housing. So there's a lot of work that's being embarked on right now by our senior city leadership, which I would welcome a response from, or yourself, is how is the work of the Auditor General's office and this report and future reports going to come together with the governance review and how we work together?
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Review the readiness for an audit. And sometimes when an organization is in change, you may not proceed to do an audit at that time. What I have found, though, is that is actually the perfect time to conduct an audit, because you lay out a roadmap of lessons learned so that as you move forward with the governance, you can incorporate take from the old issues and incorporate it in the new approach going forward. So that's the first thing. The other thing we do is we do a phased approach. So as soon as we finish a phase around wait lists, that comes out. As soon as we finish rent geared income, that comes out. And that's why we have this overview audit, moving forward together. It's at a very high level, because we wanted to start everybody off in the right direction, and then we continue to put information to feed a roadmap of how things could possibly change going forward. So we use those two things. One, we go in sometimes when it's in a state of flux, but two, we use a phased approach so that we can report out periodically.
Excellent. And maybe I would just ask management or city management, maybe our deputy city manager, in the governance review trial committee housing from the city side, how is this work going to coattail with that?
Well, through the chair, we're working quite closely with the city's real estate division and Create TO, and through that governance framework, we will be bringing forward recommendations on how to better integrate TCHC development with our own internal efforts here, and make sure that not only is it replacing the RGI units that they're mandated to do under the shareholder direction, but looking at how to move forward on other city priorities such as affordable housing. So that'll be coming through the June report. There was also a report that went to Planning and Housing Committee that looked at how we could better align those things in the interim until we move forward on that, on a new governance with that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ford. Are there questions from other members of the committee? Councillor Fletcher, did you wish to do a second round?
Just one question more, which
So
was,
let me just get the consent of the committee. We're okay with that? Any objections? Thank you. Please proceed. And Councillor Ford, I got you for a second.
are you seconding me?
I am.
Thank you so much.
It's excellent.
It was just a follow-up to that one question that I'd asked. And I know that your proposals, which I think are great, actually, I'm so happy that you've gone and done this, your team, you and your team, that in the Lawrence Heights conversation, I wasn't clear. With 100 acres, would you, through your report, assume that through the city, through the Create TO and through TCHC, that everyone would go back and have a look at where the opportunities might be to add some affordable housing there, or whether that ship is, to just decide, is that ship sailed, or is it possible to add any new in Phase 2 Lawrence Heights? What would your expectation be at this point, Madam Auditor General?
I'm going to
Auditor.
stand by my recommendations, and my recommendations outline that before you proceed to beyond each gate, that you take a pause, bring the parties together, and leverage any opportunities you can, because I don't know that you're going to get a second chance. So I think it's timely. I can say that the city seems to be on board. I feel that Chris Murray and the team has supports it. I know the TCHC, I believe, also supports everything. And so I think it's an exciting opportunity to brainstorm and be creative and see what you can do with the lands.
And the TCHC board pulled out number 1 in order to make sure that was being done.
That is
You
correct.
okay with that?
That is correct.
Yes, okay, good, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ford, you had a follow-up question.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I do have one follow-up question, so I will be brief. In your presentation, in your staff's presentation, you mentioned right near the top of it about staff recommendations and staff advice getting to council in a timely manner, as well as a very, I guess, encumbersome manner, and really having the best advice possible. What work has to be done on that? Since you mentioned it, I only assume that the work needs to be done on how recommendations flow through to the board and to city council, and that they have all the information before them. If you could just elaborate on that comment.
So a couple of thoughts that we had would include, for each phase, to really bring a consolidated view of where the city is on each phase. And that would be budget versus actual, the source of funds, the timeliness, are there material changes, the progress, to make sure at each phase, because maybe there may be some changes, some support to help. I think what can happen sometimes is that when the news is bad, perhaps people may, the management team in other organizations also may not want to bring that to the board because it's challenging, but that's when you need the most help. And you need to look at that diagnosis to keep on track, to keep moving forward. So it needs to be a lot better than it is now. And you have to, from the Yakibuchi governance report, you know, it has to make sure that it really represents what the true state is. So I've outlined a couple of items, and I know management is aware of those items, and I'm hoping that come forward you're going to have that incorporated into their reports.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Ford. Members of council wishing to speak? Councillor. Oh, certainly, my apologies.
It's just one question. So with all the 23 recommendations that we have here requesting city manager and Toronto Housing and various departments, so how would we be able to get an update on all these recommendations? Where are they going to go? So we know they've been implemented, or, you know, is at one point, who's going to see it? Council's going to see it, executive committee, planning committee? Who's going to see these recommendations once they've been implemented?
Well, thank you, and through you, Chair, you should see change happening right away. I understand the city is moving on them, TCH is moving on them, so you should see change happening right away, but I will formally report out on each and every recommendation and satisfy myself that it's been fully implemented before I will close it. So I'll keep bringing it back to the TCHC board and then through here to...
And to the audit committee?
The audit committee, and then through to council.
So we're updating, okay,
Yes.
okay, thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Nunziata. Are there any members of council wishing to speak on the item? Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was very excited to see this report, and very happy to see the Auditor General's report. Understand that she's been working on this since late 2017, and just want to congratulate her and her staff on this report. It's very difficult. You're not actually dealing with the city department, you're dealing with a third party and all of the, I guess, different structures that exist compared to a city division with the deputy city manager, in order to get things clear. So I just congratulate you on the clarity in your report. And I think when we started all of the revitalizations, affordable housing wasn't an acute issue in the city. We were doing something great by rebuilding the housing that had become stale, or just in the case of Donmount, the repair bill was going to be $40 million, the revite cost would be $40 million. And it was difficult to think about adding in new affordable housing because there was a stigma attached to Toronto community housing, which has been really broken down in many ways by Regent Park as being the stunning lead example, where people do come from around the world to see this revitalization. And I'll note that in every major city that has social housing, that there are these key sites of this type that have been redone that you visit to see how they've managed to do that, including an economic development framework. So that was the start. But now when we look at where we are today, we realize that we truly do have a very big affordable housing issue. I would also say that on all the large sites that are just normal planning sites, if you were to do that review, you would also find that we haven't achieved an affordable housing target. We've taken perhaps cash in lieu, we've done this, we've done that, and I'm just now calibrating a couple of my large sites to think, oh, I don't think we met that. So we need to be fairly vigilant, given what is going on, and our deputants are very clear that the world is changing. We have renovictions, we have gentrification, we have clearances, really, in the old part of the city, people being moved out because the rents are going up, and there's not a lot of replacement affordable housing. So this is I can't tell you how timely your report is to say, people, you have land, are you using it to the highest and best use? And by that, I don't think you mean, are we getting the major dollar value? The city's highest and best use might be different than the TREB, which is to get exactly the most money. But our highest and best use of the land that we own, I think, is to ensure that we're meeting city building goals. And just as an aside, I remember when Build was set up, Build Toronto, and it was selling land for highest and best price. And we often ended up at the OMB on the very piece of land that had been sold by the city. This shifted in the last term very strongly to be create TO, that our land has to serve city goals and needs. And as we know, affordable housing is today, I think, one of the top goals of the city and of the citizens of this city as well. So we're very aligned with our residents on that. And this report in saying, please get together, bring everyone together, and in that, I understand it would be TCHC, Create TO, and I'm really going to stress the Affordable Housing Office, which has carriage of affordable housing building in the city of Toronto. So that part just isn't as clear as I think it could be, because there's so many divisions. When you say city and the city, everybody hears, oh, that's me, that's me, that's me, that's planning, that's community development, but I do think we need that strong lead, which is in charge, to make sure that these things are being realized in the way. There are 3 sites, and they were put aside at TCHC. There's Fir Grove, there's Lawrence Heights 2, and there's Don Somerville, where I think that the board, and I believe Planning and Housing, and I would hope this committee would say, have you met the bar that you're setting now? And just please have another look and make sure that our lands are being used in the best way, and if we can afford it, to add in very, very important and city building goals of affordable housing. So thank you very much again for your work.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. Members wishing to speak of the committee. Councillor Ford? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I will be very brief. My comments to this item are more kind of an overview in nature, and more generally about Toronto Community Housing and about the audit that is in front of us and coming forward in future audits. I would just like to turn or just bring to the attention of everyone that, of course, with staff's undertaking of a governance review of how Toronto Community Housing is providing services to some of our city's most vulnerable, and how that happens. And when that report comes back, we want to make sure that any of the, and I can't say how incredibly useful audits and information that comes forward to this committee are put together to have the best recommendations on how this corporation moves forward into the future, which I believe, from my understanding, this report is due in the next few months. So just keeping everyone's minds open to how this work coincides with that, I think is very useful and very important. So thank you once again, Madam Auditor General, and Toronto Community Housing staff who is here. I know our CEO, Kevin Marshman's here, so under good leadership, and this is good work. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Ford. Are there any other members of the committee wishing to speak? I will take a moment just to make one brief comment. And I wanted to recognize an important question that Councillor Nunziata asked, which was, how do we know that these recommendations are going to be implemented? And pay particular attention to recommendation number 1. This is where I thought about some other committee work. I have the privilege of serving on the Special Committee on Governance. And The idea is not new about looking at the relationship between city agencies and city council. And so I think with my moment to speak here, I would just put a plug in for the work of that committee. This very idea has crossed the table. And I'm not suggesting that we make a formal motion to do that or a formal exercise, but maybe it's the open request as a member of that committee that councillors with particular expertise on agencies, boards, and commissions take a moment to think about how the relationship between the area that they serve and council could be improved under the guise of Special Committee on Governance. There's a lot of gateways into that process, but maybe the easiest one is just penning a letter on your thoughts to the city manager or the city manager's delegate who is looking at governance issues and bring it forward. And with that, I'll just create the open invitation for a way to look at how item number 1 will be tackled by council, and maybe it's part of a broader discussion about how we work with our agencies and how they check in with council along the way, and how there's a strategic alignment in the priorities. So thank you. With that, we have the recommendations of the report, which I would call that we vote on. So all of those in favor of the recommendations? Any opposed? And that is carried. Thank you. So it passed. Number 1. We have item AU 2.2, Fleet Services Operational Review, Phase 1, lengthy downtime requires immediate attention. We're going to hear that in conjunction with AU 2.3, Fleet Services Operational Review, Phase 1, stronger corporate oversight needed for underutilized vehicles. We have a presentation from the Auditor General and her team.
Thank you, and good morning again. To my left, I have Claire Fang Mu. She is the senior on this audit, and to my right, I have Jane Ying, this is her last audit committee. The operational review was in our 2018 work plan, and this is the first phase of our audit, and we looked at maintenance and underutilized vehicles. There are other phases to come. I would also like to recognize Calvin Coe, who is a manager on the team, and Faison Hanif, who are also managers on the team. The way we're going to structure this, Jane's going to provide the presentation for the underutilized vehicles, and then I'll work on the presentation related to the maintenance. Jane.
Yes, thank you, Auditor General. So cities' fleets has about 5,000 vehicles, and about 2,000 of them are light-duty vehicles. And these are the common types of vehicles we use every day ourselves, like sedans, pickup trucks, vans. So fleet services, they define light-duty vehicles that's driven less than 7,000 kilometers or 175 engine hours as underutilized. However, we use a more conservative threshold. We analyze them by 5,000 kilometers and 125 engine hours. And what we found was 15 divisions and TCHC had 183 underutilized vehicles in 2017, and that was increased to 230 in 2018. That's about 18% of the total fleet. It's about 1 in 6 vehicles in the fleet that is underutilized. I have to point out our analysis does not include TTC and police fleets. Those fleets are independently managed by their own divisions, by these agencies themselves. So let me just move on. So for these underutilized vehicles, city pays about $10 million for capital costs to purchase them. And every year we pay about $300,000 to maintain these underutilized vehicles. We also found that some of the divisions with quite a lot of underutilized vehicles, they also pay high amounts of kilometer reimbursements to their staff. So in 2018, the city paid about 3.7 million for staff for kilometer reimbursement. Among them, there are 92 staff members. They claimed more than 5,000 kilometers within that year, within 2018, and the total claim values is about 1.5 million. And city, the policies, we pay 54 cents per kilometers. So this next chart shows you the top 5 groups with underutilized vehicles and also a large amount of staff kilometer claims. So on your right-hand side on the chart, the orange bar shows you the number of underutilized vehicles. There are 5 divisions and TCHC on this chart. On your left-hand side, the blue sections are the number of staff who claim between 3,000 and 5,000 kilometers. So the average pay is about $2,000 per person. And the little purple side at the end is the number of staff who claim more than 5,000 kilometers. And it's about 3,600 average pay within that year. So the issue of underused fleet is not a new issue in the city. In fact, our office has raised this many times. It can date back to 2004 when we issued our first fleet operational report. As you can see on this chart, and subsequent to that, 2012 in the TCHC fleet management report, we've mentioned that. 2013, another audit report mentioned the underutilized vehicle. 2015, when we did the TTC non-revenue vehicle, we also highlighted underutilized vehicles. So Fleet Cities, Fleet Services has implemented our recommendations. So the current process is Fleet will, every year, they will analyze the underutilized vehicle and compile a list and send it to each division for comment and review. Nonetheless, the decision to keep this vehicle or procure more vehicles lie with the individual divisions. And also, we also noticed another issue in the current process. The current process that done by Fleet for the ongoing review only cover the Class 1 light-duty vehicles. So within light-duty vehicles, there's Class 1. Those are the sedan vehicles. Class 2 are the pickup truck and vans. And Class 2, even though a light-duty vehicle, they are not included in the annual review by Fleet at this point. So this, to us, is a classic example. You can see when we look at the change over the years. So if you look at the chart, the Class 1 vehicle, from 2017 to 2018, the number has gone down from 113 to 97. And that's the one that include in Fleet's annual list for division to comment. Class 2 light-duty vehicle, the number has gone up from 70 to 133. So it showed this to us it could be an example of what measures get done, and also an examples of importance of corporate oversight. So there are many opportunities to address and strengthen corporate oversight and to address these issues. At the division levels, there are opportunities to maximize car sharing within the divisions or between divisions. At the corporate levels, the underutilized vehicle can be reallocated to other divisions they need the vehicle, or to reduce this number of vehicles through attritions. So I'm just going to hand it back to the Auditor General.
Thank you. The second area we're looking at is the lengthy vehicle downtime. There are 4 classes of vehicles: light vehicles, medium vehicles, heavy vehicles, and also some equipment. So the light vehicles are the vehicles that we use to attend meetings. MLS uses them for inspection and enforcement. Medium vehicles are those pickup trucks that Parks and Rec would use, and they're used, dump trucks used for various cities' operations. Heavy vehicles are the garbage trucks, the sweepers that clean the roads, and then the equipment can be the small snow plows that clean the sidewalks and the forklifts. In October 2017, Fleet Services contracted out most of the light-duty vehicle maintenance on an alternative service delivery model. And this was done to develop a specialty in the medium and heavy-duty to get the medium and heavy-duty repairs moving quickly. It was meant to help to reduce downtime and also to improve preventative maintenance. Regardless of whether you do maintenance in-house or you contract it out, the outcomes is how you manage. And so it's really important to use those outcomes to track and unpack when you are not meeting a target. So to give you a split of the work, the city garages really take care of now the medium and heavy-duty vehicles, off-road vehicles, and also minor repairs for light-duty vehicles, such as changing light bulbs. And what's been contracted out in 2017 to allow for capacity is really the repairs of the light-duty vehicles, oil changes, normal repairs, some specialized repairs, and overflow from the city garages. So when you do contracting out, you will expect over time, you should see improvement if you're managing by outcomes. Sometimes there is a delay because legacy processes remain. So the next slide shows us that the target for the light vehicles is not being met. Its actual is 22 days versus a target of 6 to 8 days. The target for the medium vehicles is 14 days, and they're tracking at 38 days. And the target for the heavy vehicles is 31 to 48 days, and they're tracking at 51 days. Vehicle downtime is the length of time that vehicles are out of service for maintenance and repairs. And we analyzed 2 months of data from 2018 and found that 1 in 7 vehicles or equipment were out of service daily. This is worth $68 million in assets sitting idle every day. 1/5 of the medium and 1/3 of the heavy-duty vehicles were out of service daily. Your most costly vehicles, 1/3 of the heavy vehicles are out of service daily. And as you can see in the tables, the targets are not being met now, but I'm confident that Fleet will undertake to unpack any delays so that it can improve the targets. The parts delay?
Yeah. So Fleet Services purchase about 6 million in parts every year in 2018 from a parts supplier. In its contract with the city, the parts supplier agreed to provide 85% of the parts to the city at point of purchase. Point of purchase is about immediately, and that can be done because these suppliers actually operate a parts room inside cities' 4 main garages. When we analyzed the data, what we found was instead 80% delivered to us at point of purchase, we only get 21% delivered to us at point of purchase. And that may also contribute to the lengthy downtime for vehicles.
So just to give you a picture, if you have a vehicle up on a lift or you're repairing a vehicle and you need a part, it should be like Canadian Tire where you go to the window, you get the part within an hour. It should be immediately. You get the part within an hour and you go and you complete your repair. It's good to order those parts up front, but sometimes you might forget something, and that's why you would measure based on the amount of time, because when a part is delayed, the repair is delayed, the downtime happens, and vehicles are sitting idle. So that's the way it should work.
So this next slide shows you another indicator measuring the repair quality. What in the industry call is comeback. Essentially, it's looking at the repeated repair within a short time frame. So we look at 2 time frames: the comeback within 30 days and comeback within 60 days, the repeated repair. And we do expect, of course, there are going to be some repair that will come back within a short period of time. But what really strike out is if you look at the heavy-duty Class 8 vehicles we have, those are the garbage trucks and the sweepers. The repeated repair, even just for 60 days within 2 months, is about 24%. 1 in 4 repair in those heavy-duty vehicles need to be done again within 60 days. And that could be another reason we have a lot of downtime. And so on average, this Class 8 vehicle requires 16 work orders within a year. So that means it's more than 1 visit to the garage every month. Right?
So fleet does have the information. And so it's important to unpack those numbers. Perhaps it's training because there's been a shift for the light-duty vehicles to go out, and we're doing more heavy-duty vehicles. Maybe it's a part delay. Maybe it's a garage. Maybe it's a person. So you have the information within the system. If you can unpack that, you can get at the areas where the delay is occurring and reduce the downtime.
So this slide shows you the currently fleet claims about 10% of the parts that fail within the warranty period, and we don't claim any labor cost to install the parts. So we calculated if fleet was able to successfully claim about 80% of the parts within warranty and a portion of the labor cost, the city could have saved about $400,000 a year. And currently, fleet lacks dedicated staff to review and track this is called the aftermarket parts warranty claims. We'll be looking at the new vehicle warranty claims in our next phase.
So we've made, last slide, and then we'll have a video, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. We've made 17 recommendations, and I can say that fleet is underway with having a good contract with the parts supplier. And I think that it's a matter of taking out the old processes and systems and really moving forward with how they've now restructured. We're early in the process. It's a good time to be here since they've contracted out, but you need to now get rid of those legacy processes that are problematic. So our video will help to explain some of those processes.
Toronto's Fleet Services Division takes care of 5,000 vehicles worth $330 million. These vehicles are essential to the city's day-to-day operations. The city has 9 garages that repair and maintain the fleet. Every day.
Sorry, we're just going to take down our slides and then put that up. Yeah, good.
The City of Toronto's Fleet Services Division takes care of 5,000 vehicles worth $330 million. These vehicles are essential to the city's day-to-day operations. The city has 9 garages that repair and maintain the fleet. Every day, at least 15% of the city's fleet is out of service. That's $68 million a day sitting idle. Vehicles are out of service, called downtime, for maintenance or repairs. On average, every day, 13% of light-duty vehicles, 21% of medium-duty vehicles, 31% of heavy-duty vehicles, and 10% of equipment are out of service. That's 15%, or 1 in 7 units, of the entire fleet. Fleet Services buys $6 million worth of vehicle parts every year. These are used by city mechanics for repairs and maintenance work. The city's supplier is supposed to have most parts, or 85%, available immediately, but Fleet's data system showed that the parts were only available immediately 21% of the time. When parts aren't available, mechanics have to wait before they can work on a repair, which means vehicles in the city's fleet are out of service for longer than they should be. The city contracts out some maintenance work to external vendors. It can take several days before fleet even schedules a vehicle for service. And it can take 5 or more days before Fleet Services approves a vendor's repair estimate. For example, an oil change, on average, results in 3 days of downtime. Generally, vehicle parts come with warranties. Fleet Services claimed warranties for only 10% of parts that failed prematurely. City mechanics also spent thousands of labor hours removing and reinstalling these defective parts. Fleet Services has not asked the supplier to reimburse them for those hours. The city could have saved at least $400,000 per year if it had successfully claimed 80% of warranties and the associated labor costs. The Auditor General has made 14 recommendations. These will help Fleet Services to reduce downtime, better manage its vendor contracts, and take better advantage of warranties.
End of the presentation.
Thank you. With that, questions of staff? Councillor Fillion.
This is kind of a general question, and I may end up asking it in a number of, for a number of reports, but I'm sort of mystified with a lot of these that it takes the Auditor General coming in to identify these things. And so there must be some kind of underlying cultural cause or, the way we do business here cause. Like, some of these things seem so obvious, and this applies to a lot of your reports, that do you have any explanation, any common thread why we keep encountering these types of issues?
Thank you. And through you, Chair, there are three things that I see consistently. I was actually, with the city manager and I were conversing on potential themes that we're kind of both seeing. One of the things I see is working in silos, and that really came through in the TCHC report. And it might be because when the city came together, some of these services had to continue to operate, and the divisions are very strong and capable, but there has to be an overall coordination, and that's not happening to the degree I think it should. The second area is contract management. Contract management, we have a great contract with the parts supplier, for example, but the compliance with that contract and the reporting against those KPIs in the contract really were not happening. So contract management is important. When you contract out, it's not out of sight, out of mind. It's making sure that the work that is being done by others is being done to your specification. So that brings me to the third one, and that's managing by outcomes. For example, the fleet contract was a great contract because what's important to fleet is not where they're getting the parts, but actually the time to have the part on the floor so it can go into the vehicle. So timeliness is what the KPI is. If you manage by outcomes and let other things take care of itself, I feel that you're going to do better. So the first thing is silos. Second thing is contract management, making sure there's compliance. And the third area is making sure you identify the key outcomes and that they're being achieved. And
are questions of city staff separate from questions of the auditor?
I think we can do them together. I'll note that there are two items here, so if we need more time, I'm sure the committee can
Sure.
make it work.
I guess it's the same question of whoever in management wants to field this, but I'll just sort of give a preamble. If your relatively new, well-maintained vehicle was in the garage one day out of 7, you would know that either you'd bought a lemon or there was something wrong with your mechanic or something. So it would be obvious to you that there was a problem you need to solve. So how can we have these types of conditions where an oil change takes 3 days, just to pick a small example, and nobody seems to notice that it takes the Auditor General to come in? Whoever wants to field that.
Thank you for the question. Through you, Mr. Chair. When it comes to a light-duty vehicle and the turnaround time for 3 days, it's not always just apparent that it's an oil change. These vehicles also come in to make sure that they're safe to go out on the road, and that ends up being a revision into an estimate, and then that has to go through the approval stages with the contract coordinator, and then also then to the supervisor to authorize and approve the change.
Sure, I'm just saying if this was, my question was, how do we not notice it? Like, I assume management has agreed with the recommendations here that things are not as they should be. So the question broadly is, why does it take an Auditor General's report for management to see that things aren't as they should be when it does seem like it should be something that would pop out at you?
So through the chair, if I may, I just wanted to give a little bit of history, and the Auditor General actually spoke to a bit about it, Councillor Filion. There was a review that Fleet Services actually performed back in 2015 with Mercury, a consultant that actually is quite familiar with Fleet overall. And there was an implementation and plan around that was brought to the committee, and that would have been probably the Government Management Committee at that point in time around the implementation plan. And we're 1.5 years into that plan right now. What the auditor did speak about are things that we actually are very familiar with based on what came through Mercury. We're not where we need to be yet, and that is the work between what the auditor said and the work that the team is working through is part of the journey. And we're obviously trying to be as aggressive as possible. But the intent was to make sure within the next 5 years that we were actually going to be at the point that we needed to based on the Mercury report and obviously the comments that have been made through this AG report. It's things that we've actually also learned too that are actually accelerating some of the discussions we'll be having with the team. But I wanted to make sure that it's quite clear that the Auditor General report really substantiates what we're actually working through. In actual fact, it actually helps us with some of the accelerations on key items.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Ford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I did have a list of questions somewhere. Here we are. So to start off on page 3 of the presentation, right at the top, so on average, we have 18% of the city's fleet. Is that correct? 18% underutilized. Now, when in the downtime, maybe I should frame it this way. So in the downtime of the city's fleet, is that affecting city operations? So we have one side is the value for money and the downtime of the vehicle, but is city operations being affected? And if so, what's the value to that?
So, excuse me. So there's two things that through you, Chair, that I believe you're speaking about. One is the underutilized vehicle and the price of having an asset sit there and have to be maintained because you do have to do every 6 months a certain amount of maintenance. So there's a price to that, and I believe that my team will pull that out for you. On the other side of downtime for vehicles, which is in repair and maintenance, it would have an impact, and we did see in the audit of the tree maintenance that there was time where the vehicles needed to be repaired, and so it can have an effect on operations. So there is a cost on each side.
Right. And then maybe moving forward to page number 4 of the presentation. So it is saying that we are reimbursing for 54 cents per kilometer. Is that at an industry standard? Is that above industry standard, below? Where does that fall in?
I think that's about reasonable, and I'm thinking about what I would put on my tax return if I had to do that. I think it's about reasonable, and it's what industry standard would be.
Just the season, right?
It's a season.
Should be fresh.
Through that, thank you.
Yeah.
Actually late.
So, so with that, so with the industry standard and $3.7 million, and this is for right across the city for reimbursements. So that's light duty, but we wouldn't use personal, so this must only be for light duty vehicles.
Correct, it's mostly light.
3.7 million. Okay.
Correct.
And you see that there is an opportunity that we could be optimizing the light use vehicles more to save here.
Correct, and I would like to recognize that Fleet has a pilot project that they are starting, and I think you're moving along with the technology, but it's important to get that in place, I think sooner rather than later. And think about the car share program in the city. I mean, that's the kind of thing that's needed at the city, is something like that, and an easy way to get into the vehicle so that you can use it by booking it online and get into the vehicle. So we have to use technology to be able to leverage and utilize the vehicles better.
Right. Okay. And then moving on to page number 6, and just to that last point, I may have a motion coming forward on that. But moving forward to page 6, this, of course, has been definitely for a number of years. I think 2004, I was in grade 5, so I can't go back there. It has this, so this has been ongoing. So have we ever did a change of policy? What have we done, if anyone has the context, the historical context here, what decisions have City Council made to try and curb this in the past, and why hasn't that come up?
Thank you for the question. Through you, Mr. Chair. We've put a plan through the Green Fleet program. So we outlined it in Green Fleet that we would maintain about 20% and work with divisions on lowering that, which we call right-sizing the fleet. So our mark and target has been 20% over the last couple of years. It's been close to that. So 2017 was about 19%, and last year was about 22%. But we continue to monitor with our client divisions.
And is our city staff confident that we aren't going to come back in 3 years, 4 years from now with another kind of line in this? And are you confident that we'll be able to kind of turn the course on this?
So we send communication to our client departments twice a year to make sure that they understand that they have vehicles that they aren't using appropriately. They base their decision on operational requirements to justify why they continue to need those vehicles. We will continue to work with them to, change their perception and offer, again, what the Auditor General just mentioned about a car sharing program that we're piloting right now, which I think is great.
Great. And my last question is on page number 13 of the presentation. When we lay out vehicle downtime between light, medium, and heavy duty, I only assume that the increased amount of days is because the complexity of the vehicle? Or what would the reason be, if not?
So, through you, Mr. Chair, it was outlined that Fleet Services did recognize in 2015 and bring to council that in 2016 and needed a complete restructuring and organization. At the time, we'd set out these targets and implemented a 5-year plan, which started 18 months ago, and we're just into that. It was recognized at the time, at that point, that yes, the vehicles that are out for such a lengthy period of time needs to be corrected.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions from the committee? I will take a moment to ask a couple. The first couple of questions is for the audit team, and then if there's time, I'll ask one of Fleet Services. Given that Fleet Services is a central service, centralized, and it provides services to the various departments in the city, I'll ask you this. There's a piece in there about the time it takes for a department to come and pick up their vehicle after it's done. Maybe the broad question is what are the things, the habits of the users of this service out there that are of concern that need to be communicated or changed? And I'll circle around that one particular one. I think there was a finding that, the department's got to get and come pick up their vehicle faster because if it's sitting around in a parking lot for a day or two, then really we have a larger fleet to make up for that loss of productivity. So what were the general things that need to go out to the division areas, the key messages?
I would summarize it into one message, and that message is, as a city, we provide services to citizens, but as a city, we should operate as a business. And so if you had a business and you had a car that needed an oil change, you would take that car to the garage. Since it should only be a half an hour or an hour, you would maybe work on your laptop and then come back to work. If it was a longer repair, you would have a shuttle back and forth. That's what you would do, a normal person would do. I understand that there are making sure it's safe, but the garage you're going to is making sure that it's safe. So bottom line is it should operate like a business. If you think about that all the way through, I believe that it'll work things out. Right now, sometimes the old processes aren't worked out, so a vehicle may be brought to Fleet Services, who brings it to the garage, and then the garage brings it back to Fleet Services, and so there's not really the coordination that should happen. And instead of trying to fix each process, think about it from a business perspective and what you would do if you owned that business, and that's how it should operate.
In the report, it says that in the contract, there were performance thresholds. Forgive me, I think it's 85% of parts need to come in an hour. And then there was an interesting component in the report that talked about folks down in New York who found a similar calculation issue with the performance on that. I wondered if you could elaborate a little bit further around the timing and the details of that. You know, did the vendor know and have the feedback from that audit, and did it continue here in this jurisdiction? And maybe even just help me understand the math. What was the vendor claiming in terms of its performance, and how did it arrive at those calculations versus what you're recommending that we calculate the performance as?
So there was a contract change in 2018. And in the new contract, compared to the old contract, there was a formula that was defined. So there was a difference in the way that the contractor calculated the point of sale and point of purchase, and what the city, our calculations were based on the contract. And the information source was based on the information source that was identified in the contract as a fill rate. The vendor was using something else. It's important that both parties come together. The priority is to make sure the parts are available on the floor within an hour, as 85% of the time. So I think this is an awakening and a lens, and I know that Fleet is on it. One more thing, when you have a contract, the reporting against those timelines that are in the contract and the vendor has to perform to is important. And when they don't meet that, there's a penalty that occurs. And it's important that Fleet receives the reports based on those timelines and not what the vendor thinks it should provide, which shows a completely different picture.
Thank you. And last question to Fleet Services. I mean, I get it. The mechanics working on the car, they need a battery, they need oil, they need whatever it is they need. And they can't, your folks can't get the part within an hour. Why don't you just take a purchase card and go to Canadian Tire and get what you need? Like, and it's a tongue-in-cheek way of maybe saying, you know, can we get a second vendor or another way if you're not getting what you need out of this contract? Is there a contemplation for that, or do you have a plan forward of maybe closing that gap? Because I guess, you know, the minutes count, right? Every time that the car's down because you can't get a part.
Thank you for your question. So first, I just want to add a little component that we did have a fleet maintenance information system that we added a component to be able to track accurately the time it takes for ordering parts. So that was part of the first implementation to be able to hold the vendor accountable. Also, it's based on a rotation of inventory so that we have some old stock based on having still the Class 1 and 2 vehicles on the shelf. It's removing those and putting in now parts that we see more on the heavier duty vehicles. So we continue to work with the vendor and to improve, and I think you'll see the numbers change. And now that we have a complete way of vetting their information.
Thank you. Councillor Nunziata, you had questions.
Yes, sorry, I do have 3 questions, and I don't know if it's been asked. But on page 5, as far as charging for mileage, so you mentioned there are a number of them that have claimed over 5,000, correct? Yes. So the question is, I don't know if I should ask that, I mean, are there, within the department, are there not rules when somebody submits in a receipt and it's identified that you put in more mileage than you're entitled to say something at that point? Or, like, I just don't understand how this went through without without the staff bringing it forward or commenting to the staff that did claim it. I mean, for councils, when we submit in our receipts, if it's not 100%, they bring it down. They don't pay you.
Through you,
So I don't
Mr.
understand why all this is happening and we're paying.
So through you, Mr. Chair, actually, city has a kilometer claim policy, and every division and all the staff have to adhere to it, and the claim has to be approved by the management. So these are approved kilometer claim reimbursement by within each division. They approve the staff. There are some legitimate, sometimes there are legitimate use that city need the staff to use the personal vehicles and then reimburse them at the appropriate rates. So what we point out here is why we have quite a few vehicles is underutilized, driven less than 5,000 kilometers per year. On the other hand, we are also providing kilometer reimbursement to quite a few staff who claim about 5,000 kilometers. And that point to us there's some coordination and more like oversight and review that need to be done. Yeah.
So why would we pay them if they're over?
So if I may, just to complement what the Assistant Auditor General said, there is a policy. The policy is very specific that these are related to business requirements. The appropriate managers do sign them. All of these are business requirements. That's why they're signed. There is a policy for it. What the Assistant Auditor General is saying is that there's an opportunity to look at the underutilized vehicles and the personal, and it's not personal use, it's actually, they're using their personal vehicles to do business. And what we can do is see if there's an opportunity to actually utilize more of the unused vehicles. That's what she's saying. Not that they're not using their vehicles for business, because they absolutely are using their vehicles for business. I just wanted to clarify that.
That is correct.
Okay, I still don't understand. But it came up as an issue for you, correct? So are we paying people that we shouldn't be paying? Is that the case, or
Yeah, so let me
like, are we overpaying? Like, I just need to understand this.
Let me clarify, Mr. Chair. On the one hand, we have vehicles that are underutilized, maybe 3,000 or 4,000 kilometers, 5,000 kilometers sitting at the city and being maintained every 6 months. And on the other side, we have people using their own vehicles and being paid kilometerage. And some of the payments and some of the kilometerage is quite high. So we said, having a citywide lens, what's available, where are they, have pods of cars that can be booked so that staff can, to the best of their ability, leverage the underutilized vehicles. There are times when it makes more sense to use a personal vehicle. But for the most part, if there's a vehicle sitting in my building, I'm going to leverage that vehicle by booking it and using it. And that's what we're saying. So lower the kilometerage by staff where it's quite high and use the underutilized vehicle because they're sitting there not being used.
Okay, one more question, because I know I only have, so on page 16, the warranty, okay, so that city staff have not claimed warranties on the vehicles for 80% of the parts, and actually we've lost a lot of money on that because we haven't claimed warranty on any of the vehicles. So how does that happen, and why does that happen? Why would we not claim warranty if we have warranty? And if it's been brought forward to the attention of the supervisor, and why it wasn't brought forward when we went through the budget process that we were actually, we could have been saving this money and we've lost a lot of money.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. And this item of warranties has been brought up also at TTC, and TTC has moved forward to increase that rate, and I know that the fleet can increase that rate. I don't know why it's so low and why the hours related to that aren't being claimed, but maybe the Assistant Auditor General can add to that.
One of the problem we noticed was in order to claim the warranty, the mechanic in the city garage has to first identify that defective part that they pull out is within the warranty period, and then they can trickle the claim process. Someone then has to submit the form and claim it. If the mechanic didn't identify this part is within warranty, or in the system they didn't identify all the parts that are within the warranty, then it can miss, like we didn't note this part. And that was a problem in TTC when we did the audit with TTC, and since then they have improved that process and
Okay,
the
but
claim.
that's a concern of mine. And then, sorry, just what you're saying in your report, lack of dedicated staff to review and track warranty claims. So if that's the case, then why was it never brought forward to our attention? Well, we have a problem here, you know, like we need another staff, or like it's never brought to our attention, and which frustrates me. So that was the reason I asked that question.
And one last comment through you, Chair. It's my understanding that once you put in the system that a part has a warranty, if there's a defection on that and you take the cost that it costs to change that part, the part supplier, we're already really paying them to take care of that warranty process. So we've paid for the process in hiring through the contract, the part supplier, to return it, to do the recovery, to bring it back. We simply have to do the front-end part of identifying parts with warranty and making sure that when it fails, it goes back, because there is a cost. There's downtime, there's labor costs, there's the part costs. So that has to get back into the system.
Thank you. Are there committee members wishing to speak? Councillor Ford?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I believe I have a motion to place that we have sent over to our clerks. And it is in relation to the reimbursements for city vehicles or private vehicle use. As soon as we can get that up. So I'll move that the city manager, our city council requests city manager to report to the General Governance and Licensing Committee on the feasibility and cost benefits of options that can minimize reimbursements to staff for personal vehicle use to achieve the best overall value for the city. And I think in the conversations we've had at committee today, I think that is exactly what I think the purpose of the audit showed, was how do we best maximize the use of city vehicles that we have sitting not being used. So I think this is a report that would be very helpful to us. Of course, I acknowledge that I am sure a lot of circumstances where we can't just do away with that policy. I think we just need to minimize it as much as we can. But I also share the frustration of my colleague in our questioning around kind of it takes the Auditor General to kind of pull this up when this is happening, and I think there has to be some better accountability. And one of the things that concerned me, and which I asked our staff, is around page number 6, where it shows that this has come forth to the committee and to City Council a number of times. So we hope that I hope that this would be the last time that the underutilized fleet comes here, because when we are talking millions of dollars, we are talking about investments into Toronto Public Health, into childcare, into all the budget pressures we have at the city. So I think it's very important that we are optimizing this stuff to the best of our ability. So I'll be moving that motion, and thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Ford. Are there any other members wishing to speak? Councillor Nunziata?
Speak briefly. I would support the motion and the recommendation. And I'd like to thank the auditor. I mean, like, I don't know. It seems like if we don't do audits, that we don't find efficiencies. You know, it's frustrating, and it's frustrating for me when a lot of it is just, you know, oversight, department oversight, ensuring that the staff are doing what they're supposed to be doing, trying to find efficiencies, and a lot of it is really common sense as well. And none of this has been brought forward to us at committees. And when we go through the budget process, not once is it mentioned that they don't have dedicated staff to review and track warranty claims. Like, none of that's mentioned to us. And, you know, like, it's frustrating. That's all I could say. So thank you very much, and I hope that these recommendations are going to be implemented. And at the end of the day, when we go through our next budget, I want to see these savings, because there's a lot of savings from these reports. Thanks.
Thank you. And I will speak briefly. I did have a small motion. Thank you. And it was just to add a piece to recommendation number 14, and just specifically mention taking steps for the division areas to improve the speed at which they go and collect their vehicles after service. And I'll just make the general comment. Great work by the Auditor General in both reports, and her team, of course. I see that Fleet Services has plenty of work to do, and we've talked about them today. It's contained in the report. What I don't want to ignore, though, is the importance of the role of the city manager going forward on this and the division heads. The departments rely on the services of Fleet Services to run their business, and in many ways have control over how they are consumers of that service. And so it's really important to make sure that they're consuming the service in the best way possible and got the right policies and procedures around it. So I don't know how they will work their magic, but I think there is some attention needed on these audits throughout the divisions, not just the subject of the audit. Councillor Ford has placed some very, very valid questions, and a reminder that care needs to be looked at the policy of when somebody chooses to submit kilometers or to go take a fleet car or one of the other arrangements that we've got for vehicles. Because that choice, and it's like 1,000 cuts going on all over the place, that one particular choice at that moment can have an impact on the performance of the fleet itself in terms of underutilized vehicles. So there's great recommendations. I think that particular ask of Councillor Ford will draw attention to that particular item. And in this case, the general proviso that the city manager work with staff really across the Toronto Public Service to look at the recommendations of the audit report. But I just want to draw a highlight to that and just say, of the one things in there that I really saw was this discussion on being prompt about picking up your vehicle, and what the auditor talked about. If it's going in for a quick service, be right on top to get that vehicle back out. Because otherwise we have a larger fleet, just because we have to buy more cars to deal with those extra cars that are sitting around. And I know it's a tough thing, it's a big public service, but I think this message has to go out, and I think it will actually make a cost savings. So with that, I'll call for votes on the amendment. First on Councillor Ford's on AU 2.3 as an amended additional. All of those in favor? Any opposed? On the item as amended, that's the those are the recommendations of audit item 2.3, and I apologize, I've done them in reverse. So all of those on the entire item. Any opposed? That's carried. Back to item 2.2 on my amendment to item number 14. All those in favor of the amendment? Any opposed? That's carried. And then on the entire recommendations, all of those in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried. Thank you. So that takes care of items 2.2 and 2.3. I have a housekeeping request for the committee. Mr. Wright from the TTC has informed us that he is conflicted between two meetings. I would propose to the committee that we just quickly reorder item 2.5 to come next before the forestry item. I'm sure there's some questions, and I'd like to make sure that the TTC have the folks in the room to answer those. So do we have any objections to consenting to that? So therefore, the committee, we will jump ahead to AU 2.5. Mr. Wright needs to leave in a few minutes, so I think the committee has agreed that we would not have a presentation on fare evasion. Great. So AU 2.5, Review of Toronto Transit Commission's Revenue Operations, Phase 1, Fare Evasion and Fare Inspection. With that, are there questions of staff? No, I think the committee's decided not to have the presentation. Did you have particular questions, Councillor Nunziata?
So can you just give an overview of your report and the loss of revenue and fair invasion? Just a short overview. And then also the history. I know in the past few years, the issue has been brought up at our budget meetings. And I know I asked the question for 2 years when we went through the budget process, and other members of council had concerns as well, so it goes back a few years. So if you can just touch on that.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the questions. So we conducted lots of field work for this particular audit, and we actually, our staff went out and did the work with TTC's fair inspectors to record the fair invasion rates. We found the overall system-wide fair invasion rate was 5.4%, and that amounts to about 61 million revenue loss from fair evasion. There's another 3 million that is based on TTC's calculation from malfunction and Metrolinx equipment. The fair evasion rate somehow, even though it's 5.4%, but the difference varies significantly across the different mode of transportation. So for streetcar, it's much higher, it's 15.2%, bus is 5.1%, and subway is 3.7%. We also found quite a few of fraudulent use of child cards. Right now, the child card is free, and because the city has a policy, children under 12 or under, they can travel on TTC free, and Metrolink, there's a petrol child card, so people, if they obtain a child card, they can actually get on TTC free of charge. And so we during the observation period, the TTC fair inspector actually identified quite a few of these fraudulent use of child card by adults, and we didn't see any children using the child card. So we did have recommendations on that. We have recommendation on the fair invasion, the inspection program, and try to make it more effective, such as using more often use the plain clothes, so when they're trying to really measure the fair evasion rate, and making sure the fair inspector has the proper tool and authority to enforce the fair invasion policy.
And if I can just add one more thing, Councillor, one of the biggest things that I found challenging was the 2% fair evasion rate, and that actually was based on a 2011 audit of one streetcar line. It didn't include buses, it didn't include subways, and when it was brought forward to council and to various committees, including Budget Committee, what I saw was that it didn't necessarily represent a fair picture of the actual evasion rate. And when additional information came forward, for example, when Meltest did their review, it did provide a more accurate picture, but it wasn't quite 100%. So in the TPA review, governance review, it was very illustrative. The Yakibuchi, in his report, said, it's management's duty to diligently provide an accurate, clear, and complete informational picture to the board. It should not omit information where doing so would leave the board with an inaccurate understanding of an issue. So, as I said earlier, sometimes negative information doesn't come forward because maybe it's challenging to present, but that's when you need to do it.
Yeah, so one of the recommendations, 5, I guess, yeah, is that the board requests the chief executive officer to explore system-wide options that can help prevent and reduce fair invasion on streetcars with multiple doors.
Correct.
So, but we've been told that for years, that that's what they were doing. So this is not being done.
The CEO is here. CFO, sorry.
Through the Chair, Councillor Dan Wright, CFO of the TTC. So I can't speak for years past because I joined the TTC 1 year ago, almost exactly. But I can say that what I observed when I arrived is that we were then in very significant Presto implementation completion and Presto card adoption mode. And there was appetite for increasing, serious appetite for increasing fare evasion control efforts starting in, when I arrived in April. The view was that we would start early in 2019. The Auditor General came along with her team with an incredibly helpful report that showed us that, if anything, our instincts weren't strong enough, that this was a bigger issue than we had appreciated. And so with the further impetus of the Auditor General saying that we had a problem, particularly on streetcars, we went into a much more intensive mode. For example, in the fall of 2018, we established a revenue control unit whose job it is to work with fare inspection on where do we see fare evasion happening in the Presto data. So I can't speak for the FAST, but I can tell you that the CEO has made it very clear to me this is...
Can I just ask one question? I know you've just started, and I understand that, but what is the reason and why did we, and I don't even know how long ago it was, that we did have all the doors of the streetcars open, front and back, buses, and people just coming in from the front and back and just walking in? Like, what was the reason for that?
The reason is streetcars are a very effective way. As I understand, I wasn't here when the decision was made to buy those stars, but streetcars are a very efficient way to move lots of people. As we've seen on King Street, a well-functioning streetcar route can move more passengers more efficiently than buses can. And all-door boarding would do that. Where we obviously clearly realize now is we have to beef up fare inspection with all-door boarding, because this view that Torontonians would not cheat, to put it bluntly, has been proven naive, if I can put it that way.
And we may be moving a lot of people, but we're moving a lot of people free of charge. So, I mean, I think we have to look at that. Okay, I'll speak.
Councillor Fillion.
Just a question of TTC staff, and I know this has been, well gone over by the commission board, and I'm, have every reason to think people are on top of it. But I'm just going to go back to something that the Auditor General highlighted, which is the incorrect. It would appear to be deliberately incorrect information being brought forward to the board, which I guess I consider the most serious thing of all the problems. And just wondered what comment you have to make about that.
So I arrived at the TTC just as that consideration internally was winding down, I guess I can put it. And what I was told at the time, and all I can relay, is there were concerns about how that report was done. And there was, in fact, some question raised about whether we ought to come forward with the report's findings. But firstly, there was a lot of concern about how the report was done. Now, in that regard, as the Auditor General has pointed out, it turns out that that report's information was quite similar to what the Auditor General's team found. So it turns out our concern about the report it didn't lead to a data issue, at least. But secondly, again, this view that, keep in mind that we were having a lot of trouble with Presto implementation. We had subway entrances that were open for weeks at a time, people flowing into the stations. We felt some pressure, frankly, from the people we answer to not be harassing people for fare payment if they had a legitimate excuse that the Presto device wasn't working on the bus or the streetcar, the vending machines weren't working yet on the streetcars, and debit and credit is still not working. Device reliability was in the low 90s, so it's gotten quite a bit better. And so the view when I arrived a year ago was, we have some sort of fare evasion issue. We're not sure what it is. Turns out it's worse than we thought. But once the Metro Pass is discontinued in December 2018, and we are full on with Presto, which we are now, Presto adoption is about 80%, we will beef up fare inspection efforts. And consistent with that, as far back as last August, before the Auditor General even started her work, the CEO agreed that we would add, at the time, we said 50 new fare inspectors for 2019 budget. As it turned out, we increased it to 7 as we started to realize the extent of the problem.
Sure, I'm just going to stop because really my question is about the board not being given information being withheld from the board. So even if you get some findings and you're not sure if you totally agree with them, and I don't mean you personally, but whoever was in charge of this at the time, and there's some explanations and there's some things you're planning to do, why not bring all of that forward? My problem is with the management concealing information from the board.
I think two things are true. I think with the benefit of hindsight, and I don't mean that as a throwaway comment, it should have been brought forward. That's very clear now. And my observation, and perhaps this is part of what is informing Rick Leary as CEO, is I have, in my days in the public sector, I've never had a boss who was more radically transparent and insisting that things come forward. So I think that collectively we've learned that lesson and are very quick to bring things forward. I can tell you as CFO, I don't know if I would have had a concern at the time. I wasn't there. It's a hypothetical. But I imagine, I'm quite confident now, anything that needed to come forward would come forward. I wouldn't even have to insist in my capacity as CFO. It would just come forward.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any other questions from the committee? So I had a couple. So reading this report, some time ago, actually, when it came out, I was aghast at what was going on with the child Presto cards. And I just wondered, why haven't we dealt with this, or have we dealt with this so far? Have we? It seems to me that, somebody couldn't look at the computer system and see a child card swiped in at Jane every morning, at 7:30, Monday to Friday, and swiped in at King every day, Monday to Friday at 4:30 on the way home, fitting the profile of, say, an office worker. And why haven't we red flagged those and dug into them further? And there's tons of opportunities with an electronic system like this, let alone some of the stuff in the report that's really basic, like having different colors for the cards and bells and whistles go off, or a smiley face when you swipe it, and make it really obvious it's a child card.
Chair, that is a terrific question, and I will. Let me give you a bit of an answer. The first is that a year ago, there weren't many child cards being used. But for example, in the month of March this year, there were 17,000 unique child cards used on the TTC system. And for the first 90 days of the year through the first 13 weeks of the year, there were 22,000 unique cards. That's like, I don't have the number committed to memory, but it's like 100 times more than a year ago. So suddenly it becomes, we have a lot more data to work with. This is analysis that we've been using, just doing over the last few weeks, but I find it quite interesting that when you have a look, we have locational information, time of day information, day of week information. You look at how the child cards are being used, and how is it that over 10% of child card taps are after 9 p.m. and before 7 a.m.? It doesn't make sense. We have been in conversation with Metrolinx for a long time on this. We have asked them, for example, to have a different colored child card so that at least there was some sort of visual signal to people watching that somebody with a beard looking like they weren't 12 had just tapped in with a child card. A different light or sound on the device, mindful of human rights concerns. So we're in continued conversation with Metrolinx, but for example, I gather for branding reasons, I'm not exactly sure, Metrolinx has not wanted to have a different color. As another example that I find frustrating as CFO in terms of revenue control, we require ID to get a child card. But you can go, I'm almost nervous saying this in public forum, except that we have to do something about it. You can go to other properties, including the GO system, and just ask for a child card and get one. And then use it on the TTC system, because a Presto card is good anywhere it's loaded for that property, and child cards are loaded to be used anywhere throughout the Presto system. So at least we're asking for ID, proving that whoever you need this card for is 12 and under, but other parts of the Presto system, you can just get a child card. And then it's up to us to catch who's using a child card inappropriately. So we are in continued conversation with Metrolinx, although we are by far the largest single user of Presto by far. We are just one property of many. We don't own the system. Metrolinx owns the system. And so the dialogue continues.
And so does it continue that people are selling child Presto cards as bottomless cards on Kijiji for $100?
We're trying to put a stop to that as best we can, but one of the challenges we're up against, for example, is that if one of our inspectors finds someone using a Presto card, it's not our card, it's Metrolinx property. So if we found them, for example, having a fraudulent Metro Pass, we could confiscate it. We are not allowed to confiscate a Presto card. So what we have to do is circle back to Metrolinx and say, would you hotlist the card so that it no longer works? So these are, that again, the dialogue with Metrolinx continues, the possibility of them authorizing our fare inspectors and transit enforcement officers to actually confiscate the card. That's an ongoing conversation. We haven't, but even the selling of fraudulent cards on Kijiji, all we can do is alert other people that this is happening. It's not our property that's being used fraudulently.
So it sounds like a lot of conversations.
Metrolinx, yes, we have to be, all the support we could get from Metrolinx on this, the better. Not just child cards, but fare evasion generally.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? I'll take it into committee. Councillor Nunziata, you wanted to speak.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, this is very frustrating for me. The question about fare evasion, we're going back to 2016 when the question's been asked at our budget meetings. And I've asked it a couple times as well, is, we were always told that, there's been a reduction in transit, in ridership. But in fact, it wasn't, we haven't lost ridership. What we've done is lost revenue through the fare evasion. So which was incorrect. And when I asked the question about what the loss in revenue was when we went through the budget, I never got an answer on that. So here we are, $64 million we've lost in revenue in 2018. And we just went through the last budget, we just went through a fare increase, and we had a lot of protesters protesting against the fare increase. And here we are, we've lost $64 million in revenue, and we had to increase fares. This is very concerning to me, and I understand that the reason for the streetcars and the buses is to move people along and to, during rush hour. that's fine. But on the other hand, they're all getting off free. We're losing all this revenue, and we're going to continue increasing fares because we keep losing money. And I understand you just started. I understand there's a lot that you're working on, and you're working with Metrolinx as well. But it really concerns me, and really frustrated about it, because this is something that I think we've all brought up during the budget meetings. And here we are, we're trying to find money here and money there just to pay for things, and we can't even find a couple $1 million to pay, and we're going to be losing daycare and all this. And here we lose money. We've lost all this money. And it's not that it just came up this year. It's been ongoing for years now. That question has been asked. And, thank you to the auditor again. But whatever it takes to correct, to make any corrections and to correct and work with Metrolinx, you understand what the issues are and what the problems are. And so we need to fix it, and we need to speak to whoever, because the riders of TTC should not have to pay for the errors that we've made, and that we can't fix a problem and we're aware of the problem. So that really, that's why I wanted to speak on it, Mr. Chairman, because, we go through these budgets, and then we trying to find money here and there, and then that government management, we have contracts coming forward that over budget, and we have to, we have to get our own house in order before we start asking and charging our residents, our taxpayers, to pay more when we don't have our own house in order. So those are my comments, and I'm not personally, because I know you just started, you're doing your best, and hopefully we can move on. Thank you to the auditor.
Councillor Matlow.
I think this issue reflects in one solid example how screwed up our governance structure is, and how hypocritical the Ford government is with respect to its rhetoric around finding efficiencies, when in some cases such as this, they are the reason why we have these inefficiencies. We don't control the structure that actually even is responsible for collecting fares. But we operate a system that delivers transit. We now have a government that wants to, as Councillor Nunziata said, wants to cut funding for childcare, but City Hall needs to find administrative efficiencies. We have a government that wants to dismantle our subway from its feeder lines, but still expects us to operate it and understand how this is supposed to work together. We have a government that doesn't even want to address an issue because they don't want to change colors on something because of a branding concern. So this is kind of one example of many, but a clear example of where here we are in this room at City Hall talking about the Auditor General is even asking the TTC to set reasonable targets for fare evasion when the TTC doesn't actually control the fare box. I mean, that's the absurdity of this. This entire system, whether it be this, whether it be childcare, whether it be transit as a whole, whether it be our land use planning policies with respect to the announcement yesterday with the return of the OMB, goes against every basic subsidiarity principle. There's no way that the average taxpayer knows who's actually spending those tax dollars or the fare box to actually deliver the service, and they have no idea who to hold to account. Because we are ostensibly, or the TTC is ostensibly supposed to be operating the transit system, but it doesn't have control over the fare box. The TTC in the city is ostensibly supposed to be providing transit, but the government now wants to take over even who does what and where it goes. We are ostensibly supposed to be the ones who are delivering childcare, but the government gets to just in the middle of a budget year decide that we don't have enough money to deliver what we committed to. And I could go on and on. We ostensibly are the ones, for example, that are supposed to be deciding on community land use planning, where services go, social services infrastructure, but the government's decided that an unelected, unaccountable body is going to have the last say over every decision made. We're ostensibly supposed to be planning communities, yet the school boards are a completely different entity to the city. We have a screwed up governance structure. It's not working. The governance structure is completely dysfunctional. And here we are coming back to trying to deal with fare evasion. I think it is actually absolutely folly that we're actually thinking that we can attend to this issue when we don't have a governance structure that supports doing this in a comprehensive, clear, focused way that one brain and one voice can make one decision. We should have never had a scenario where we are where our fare box is run by one order of government and then the system is operated by another. It's not working, and we need to address that.
Thank you, Councillor Matlow. Councillor Fillion, you expressed a desire to speak.
Thank you. So with all of these reports, I tend to go to what's the root cause of this, and we see the symptoms and which, again, I commend the Auditor General for just outstanding work on all of these reports. But so we see the symptoms that are costing us millions and millions of dollars, in all divisions of the city. It's really extremely troubling. But then, so what's the root cause of that? And in this case, I think the root cause is the failure of management to acknowledge the problem in the first place. And if management had acknowledged the problem earlier, then steps would have been taken, before the Auditor General found all the symptoms that were costing us tens of millions of dollars. And I think that's the case with most of these. With this one, again, it has the added element of, and I'm not trying to beat up on, staff who are there now who've acknowledged the problem and seem to be trying to work with it, but the not bringing information forward to the board of management of an organization so that they're aware of a problem and can do their oversight responsibility by when information isn't brought forward to identify the problems, then those of us who are elected or appointed to these bodies cannot do our job. So the root cause here, I think, is that, and I find it really disturbing, and I hope that, and I'm partly talking to the city manager, and I know I'm preaching to the choir with him, but we need to have a culture in this place where that's just not an option, that you withhold bad news or try to not bring things forward unless someone asks, or if they ask, sometimes give them misleading information. That should be a fireable offense, and it should need to be a fireable offense because it should be part of the culture here. And if you don't want to be part of that culture, then perhaps work somewhere else. So like Councillor Nunziata and like all of us, it's just very frustrating that we keep having these things uncovered, and we really need to change the culture of this place to the point where the Auditor General goes in and doesn't find much, because some of the reports we have here today are just, such glaring examples of something being wrong in the culture here.
Thank you, Councillor Fillion. Any others wishing to speak? So I will speak. I do have a motion. I'll paraphrase it. It's to ask the city manager, the city council, ask the city manager to write to Metrolinx, who are the owners of Presto, to support the TTC and try to deal with this issue of fare evasion. I think this is a problem that deserves the weight of city council before it. I was aghast reading this report for the first time, and I know it's gone through the TTC board and it's gone through the media. Words come to mind that I won't repeat. Words come to mind that I won't repeat when I get my email from Presto that says your card's been topped up after I've been using it. I cannot understand how in this city we allow cards to be sold on Kijiji that are unlimited, that people go and use and advertise. And it's not criminal, it's stealing. It's no different than walking into a store, taking a chocolate bar off the rack, saying thank you very much, and walking out. It's stealing. And for any way, shape, or form for somebody to think that it's acceptable not to pay the fare, it's mind-boggling. And so I think the vast majority of citizens in the City of Toronto don't care about the difference between the Toronto government, provincial government, Metrolinx, TTC. They just look at it as an organization. Go and sort out this problem. And with the deepest respect, I know the talks are going on, but I think there are solutions to deal with even the simplest issue of the child card. I know it's not simple, but the most glaring in this report of a child card where people go and get them and swipe in and use them as an unlimited fare. I think that that should be prioritized, should be done right away. I don't know if they have to get out a bunch of pairs of scissors and cut them in half, or if they have to lock them out in the system, or run data and figure out where they're being used, catch the people, or a whole variety and a combination of things, but I hope that work is dealt with immediately. I think the auditor, I thought it was really creative with the video that she did. I think that's as much an educational tool for councillors and those that are consuming these reports as the general public. I remember showing it to my wife, and you know, who doesn't need to follow the things that I need to follow at council, and you know, she was astounded by how simple it was to defeat the system. If you're unscrupulous, right? If you want to steal, it's that simple. And so I think we owe it to everybody that pays a fare to close this gap. It's like the broken window or the litter theory. Somebody sees one person, cheating the system, or the word gets out that, it's that simple, just hop on and get off the car before somebody else comes around. Then everyone else says, well, that's okay, they can do it, I can do it too. And suddenly it becomes normal behavior. I don't know what world normal behavior is to steal from the other riders on the car. But I'm trying to remember if it was 1 in 10 or more than 1 in 10 on a streetcar. I think that's okay. And those estimates were not on peak. I can only imagine what it is when it's really busy. So I would offer my support in any way. I hope this motion helps, and maybe some weight from council helps. But I think as a council, we should do everything we can to support the agencies that are looking at this to close this window. If not for the sake of the revenue, which is huge, but just for the sake of public confidence in our system and in our government. With that, I hope you'll support it. And my express thanks for everybody, including the Auditor General's office and the agencies, including the TTC, who are tackling this issue. It's important. Thank you. So on the amendment, all of those in favor? And on the item as amended, all of those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. We're going to go one step backwards in the agenda item. I believe it is AU 2.4. This is review of urban forestry ensuring value for money for tree maintenance services. I believe we have a presentation on that. So with that, I'll turn the floor over to the auditor.
Jane, can I take back your signed motion on that?
Of course.
Jane? Is So this is a short presentation on the review of urban forestry, and it's entitled Ensuring Value for Money for Tree Maintenance Services. In addition to my Assistant Auditor General, on my right I have Celia Leung, and she was the Senior Manager on the audit, but Annie Lau, a manager, and Irene Hugh, an auditor, also worked on this project.
By way of background, there's 10.2 million trees providing over 18,000 hectares. So that's our tree canopy. And urban forestry is responsible for protecting and maintaining and enhancing the urban forest. So that includes tree maintenance. In our first audit, we looked at permit and enforcement. And in this audit, we're looking at tree maintenance, which includes watering, pruning, and removing trees. And that was really the focus of this audit. By way of background, urban forestry currently uses both in-house, can I just go back one? There we go. By way of background, urban forestry uses both in-house contractors and, in-house staff and contractors to help to complete the tree maintenance. And the city paid $1.7 million a month, really almost $20 million a year for contract services related to tree maintenance. Now, this is the good news. And the good news is that there was a high compliance rate in relation to maintenance that involved storm cleanup, 97% compliance rate. And there is reasonably good compliance rate with pruning trees and tree planting requests, 88%. There was a low compliance rate with tree removal, but that's a more complicated process. So we've provided that feedback, and the Urban Forestry Division is looking at, the Forestry Division's looking at that. But this is an area I want to focus on, and this is about the responsibilities of the foreman. When you have trees to be maintained, there's three key things you need to do. You need to make sure that you assign the work to each crew. You need to review your daily log to make sure that what the crew does is accurate, is productive, and it's complete. So make sure the reports are complete. And the third thing you need to do is to conduct random on-site inspections and also quality inspections to make sure that what was thought to be done is actually done. I'm going to turn it over to Jane to walk through a day, to walk through a daily log and to walk through what a day looks like and what the logs look like.
Thank you. So this is an example. Okay, thank you. So this is an example of a daily log. It is a very important document because both city and contractor crews are required to record their activities every day on this log. And city pay the contractor crew according to the work hour recording on this document. And the foreperson needs to make sure what's recorded are accurate and look at the accuracy, productivity, and completeness before signing off on this daily log. So let's just take a look at it. Hopefully you can see it. So the crew, they need to if you can see it, they need to record the address, the exact address where they surface the tree, the work order to go with it. There's standard code that they need to use, such as the break or the driving time. They record the time in, time out. They record the tree positions, the diameter, so that the foreperson can go back to the site to verify whether it's, it take that long to prune this tree, the type of the species of tree, and what type of activity they record. So this is used essentially for payment purpose and also to track the everyday's work. So we're going to give you some examples of what we found. What we did in the audit, as a part of our audits, is we compare 45 daily logs to their GPS reports. This is all for contractor crews. We cannot do the same analysis for city crew because city crew don't have a GPS system in their vehicles. So this is from the contractor crews. So I'm just going to read this to you because it's very difficult to memorize all the stuff. So according to the GPS report, so the crew, they left the city yards in the morning. Then you can see actually the tree maintenance location is, I don't know whether you can see is in the bottom of this graph.
The bottom left with the trees.
With the trees, right? You see that. But they went out of the way to a shopping center That's not tree maintenance locations. And then they drove to the tree assigned locations, which is here, and they water 18 trees for 171 minutes, according to the GPS report. But in the daily log, they recorded 215 minutes for watering the tree. So these are the tree. The last tree they surfaced, it was at 11:30. Then they drove to other locations that are not on the daily log, including side street, gas stations, open roads, and you can see these locations. This is, and then they went back, just before they went back to the yard, they stopped at the locations, open streets, just for about 10 minutes, and then they went back to the yard. So the after we deduct, because every day they are allowed to take 2 50-minute break and half an hour lunch. So after we deduct the 60 minutes for allowable breaks and lunch, the time spent at all the questionable locations, so this is this area, yeah, they are only total 2.5 hours. Also, we need to point out that there are 2 trees in this, on the daily log, they said they maintained these 2 trees, but actually, according to the GPS report, they just drove by. They never maintained these 2 trees, watered these 2 trees. So it's not just loss of productivity. It's a inaccurate record because they said they maintained watered these 2 trees. There will be a record in forestry system, say these 2 trees have been watered and they won't be watered again. So it can also affect the health of these trees that city plant. So
7 years before.
Yeah, so this one, and then this one is quite simple. We just want to show you an example of how the crew, as they set out the day, so they went to surface the tree, and then they drove by a tree location and went to another tree. But on the daily log, they recorded, they pruned this tree for 45 minutes, where in fact, according to the GPS report, the vehicle never stopped there. So again, this is create an inaccurate record in the system. And according from what we know, the cycle for tree pruning, proactive pruning, is every 7 years. So that tree will not be pruned again for another 7 years. So this is another example of, so after leaving in the morning, as you can see from the top, the vehicle went to 2 locations. First one is a coffee shop. The second one is a gas station. And then they stopped. None of them is work-related or recorded on their daily log. And then they stopped near the assigned 3 locations, which you can see, for about 161 minutes. And so this one actually illustrates another efficiency issues. So you see, they, if I just go back, you see the roots, they went down. There are trees there, they're supposed to surface, but they didn't surface those trees. They didn't prune those trees. They drove to another tree, and it's for a valid reason, because those trees, according to the daily log, they're parked car for those trees, so they couldn't surface it. In fact, they spent 45 minutes waiting for the parked car to be moved. They have to go to another location to surface this tree, and they drove all the way back, then surfaced this tree. And then they went to a location that is not work-related, and that location they spent about, I think it's about 30 minutes there. They then went back. So this one, when we added up, the crew reported 5.7 hours for pruning 4 trees, but when we look at the GPS report, there's only 2.8 hours, according to the GPS report, they actually could use for actual tree maintenance services. So I'm just going to give you one last example. This one, they started off in the morning, from the yard, and they then drove to the tree surface location, as you can see. According to the GPS report, the vehicle then left the assigned location at around 11:30. In fact, in the last map, they usually left around 11 o'clock, 11:30. And then they drove to a number of locations, including a cemetery, side street, residential street, that these locations are not, they do not appear to be related to city work. There's no tree there to be maintained. And then just before they went back, sorry, I just need to, just before they head back to the yard, they stopped just in the open street for 20 minutes. And then they head back to the yard at around 2:40. So when we compare the time, the total questionable time for this daily log is about 2.2 hours. That is not matching the GPS report. So to sum up, based on our 25 samples we look at, this chart gives you a breakdown of the average time spent amongst these 28 crews. So there's quite a bit of time spent on drivings. But if you take out all the driving time and yard time and other time, the other times include sometimes they have to dispose of the wood in the wood chip compounds, or they have to move the car, just I explained, because they're parked out on the streets. There's only about 4.5 hours, according to the log, that is spent on actual tree maintenance activities. But out of the 4.5, 1.7 hours, we cannot match them to the GPS report. So they could appear that they're not doing, the 1.7 hours is not doing city-related work. Then, that's only leaving about sorry, I can't see. Is that 2.6 hours that are for on-site city tree maintenance activities.
And I'm just going to add, there could be a valid reason, we pointed out in our report, there could be a valid reason, but the site locations that they're looking at are both in a work order, and it has to be recorded accurately on the daily log. And the daily logs did not record these stops, and if they were for the city, they should have been, because the daily logs, the foremans have to ensure they're accurate, that they're complete, and that, you know, the quality is there.
Okay, so we're going to hand the presentation to Celia Yang, who is the Senior Audit Manager in charge of this audit.
Thank you, Jane. In total, we reviewed 139 daily logs from both city and contractor crew. We found 41% of them have missing data or entries that should have been questioned. We found the following issues. The crews reported duplicate work on the same tree in multiple logs. They indicated activities such as watering, pruning, or unspecified activities on dead trees, locations with no trees, a tree stump, tree where work had already completed, or on the tree that they noted themselves with no work required. There are missing work order or service requests to support some of the reported work performed. Some logs have incomplete information, or they do not have the foreperson's approval. We also found that the effectiveness of inspection program can be improved. On an overall basis, Urban Forestry did not meet the required minimum number of inspection in 2017 and 2018. The bar graph on the left shows you the percentage of on-site inspection completed in 2018 per regional office. And to give you some background information, the on-site inspection is conducted by a foreperson while the crew is working at the tree location. The number of required on-site inspection is different for each of the regional office because it is based on the number of crew assigned to each of the office per week. The red line shows you the required completion rate, and the bar shows you the actual percentage of inspection completed. The yellow bars represent the contractor crews, and the blue ones are the city crews. The bar graph on the right shows you the percentage of quality control inspection completed per regional office in 2018. quality control inspection is completed by foreperson after a crew has finished their work at the tree. Unlike the on-site inspection, each regional office is required to perform the same minimum number of inspections for quality control per week. The red line shows you the required percentage rates to be completed for quality control, and the yellow bars are the actual completion rates for contractor crews, and the blue ones are the city crews.
Can I just ask that we pause for one moment? We'll just do some housekeeping here. We've got 4 minutes to the scheduled break. We have the balance of this item, and we have one item being held. I just want to check with the will of the committee that we just complete the agenda. If that showed me I have a motion for that. All those in favor, any opposed? Thank you. So we'll complete the agenda. My apologies for the interruption. Please carry on.
So, in addition, most of the foreperson we interviewed during our audit would call the crews prior to visiting the site for their random on-site inspection. It is from our point of view that this defeats one of the purposes of the random on-site inspection to verify that the crews are actually working at the assigned tree locations. Based on our GPS comparative analysis, we noted that the activities that should be questioned usually take place in the afternoon, but forepersons usually conduct the inspection in the morning. In addition to performing the actual tree maintenance work, we found that crews also spend a considerable amount of time on supporting activities, such as waiting at the yard time, and the time driving to tree locations, wood chip compounds, and back to yard, the time waiting for parked vehicles to be moved to access the tree, the time spent for wood disposal, or the time spent due to equipment or vehicle malfunctions. We acknowledge that some of these time spent is unavoidable as it is part of the working process, but there may be room to reduce them by improving the operational efficiency for urban forestry. I'm going to pass it back now to the Auditor General to conclude.
Thank you. And this is our last slide. There are 10 recommendations that have been embraced by the city to help urban forestry move forward in this area. The themes are the same, and I know the city manager is aligned with me on the themes of really trying to focus on contract management, managed by outcomes. It doesn't matter how long people drive around. You got the trees, and maybe do it by piecemeal, payment by piecemeal. And the third area is leveraging technology where you can, instead of a paper-based process, to have efficiencies in the system. So I wish to thank the urban forestry team for their contribution to the audit.
Thank you for the presentation. I will now ask committee members if there are questions. Councillor Matlow, I had you first. Councillor Fillion.
So to be clear, the urban forestry staff's cars currently don't have GPS equipped, but our contractors do. And with respect to our contractors, do the drivers of those vehicles, are they made aware that they are GPS equipped?
My understanding is GPS is a part of the contract, that GPS logs, that's how we got the logs, they're from the
But
contract.
the actual worker driving the vehicle,
I'm unsure. I'm actually over to the city to answer that.
Yes, that's correct. The contractors and their crews are aware that their vehicles are equipped with GPS.
so they're aware that they're being tracked as they're hanging out at a coffee shop?
All contract crews are required to be equipped with GPS. It's in the contract.
That sounds rather stupid. I mean,
Well, the contract does allow for breaks. We do pay for a 15-minute break.
yeah, but this isn't what you're
But when
referring
it's
to in the
longer,
report. Yeah.
yeah, correct.
So there are some individuals fully aware that everywhere they are going is being tracked from a satellite, and they are still abusing the system. So is there any advice or suggestion on if people who are aware that they are being tracked and still decide to be places that they shouldn't be or elsewhere rather than where they should be, is there something that we can do to educate them? Are there better consequences to
tell them that they might face? I mean, what is the answer to, perhaps through management or to you?
I mean, that might be a legal question. This is really about contract compliance. You have the information available to match up. And when you start to see a pattern of discrepancies, they really should be questioned. You'll probably see people come back in line over time. And if there are discrepancies, for example, if the city has asked the crew to do something that is not on the work log, first of all, it should be recorded on the daily log. And the second is any discrepancies should be documented at that time, so legal action, if necessary.
Well, what are the consequences now? Because you're recommending that the city cars be equipped with GPS, but the Auditor General is already finding that there are abuses happening with our contractors. So what are the consequences? And what are the consequences, and also what have been the consequences in these cases?
So first, it's really important to know that we were the first to use the GPS to compare to the daily log.
Yeah.
And then the Forestry had gone back and tried to match up. So you have to do the match up first.
Right.
And then where there's a discrepancy, it's making sure there's legal tools.
Well, and by the way, and I asked this sort of in the same line that Councillor Fillion was asking before, that it's like, it's kind of one of these things where it's like there's a satellite that tracks these people, and they've been going to coffee shops. So how does this happen, and are there consequences? It just seems kind of like if anything should be able to be caught, it's something that is like actually on a computer screen in front of you.
So through the chair, there's a number of different systems around compliance with these contracts. The GPS system that the contractors have in these vehicles, the city doesn't have real-time access to these GPS systems. So the process that the Auditor General went through in this report required a request of all the GPS logs for all the days that were noted in the sample that they did, and then a very time-intensive process of literally minute by minute, comparing the GPS logs to the daily logbooks. So there is, through this report, things that we've identified moving forward. Noted in the sort of themes that came forward around technology, we are in the process of implementing the enterprise work management system across the city, which will, for the most part, digitize and automate this system to a level that it hasn't been automated before, so that there will be real-time tracking within the city system that is directly connected to the daily log system.
Would you answer my question, though, with regard to what are the consequences, and then what were the consequences? So did the contractor, did the owner of the company take any action to address their workers abusing our trust?
Right, so we have a spot check system. So when we've identified things that aren't appropriate, we'll be addressing that directly with the contractor. To the Auditor General's comment, this is a sample of, I think, 45 daily logs out of 24,000 daily logs. So there will be a process that we are going back with the contractors of these particular areas to look at a comparison of GPS with daily logs moving forward.
I know the time's run, but I with all due respect, and I adore you, but I actually haven't heard an answer. What are the consequences, and in this case, what were the consequences, if I may? Yes.
So through the speaker, and I'm going to look for some PMMD and legal advice on this. We have some terms within the contract of going back and tracking work, and when there are discrepancies, we certainly can challenge the contractor on the bills and the invoices that have been forward, and that is a process we will be moving through on this. How far back we can go is, a question that we really need to work with PMMD and our legal team on.
So we don't really know if anything. Okay, I'm hearing that we don't know that if anything actually came out of this. Like nobody was held to account. Nothing. That's what it sounds like. Am I wrong?
I should just to add through the chair that from the sample that was done on the 28th, that there appeared to be a lack of match between the GPS and the, we did go and track manually all of the work to ensure, as an example, that the work had actually been done. So moving forward in looking at some of the, some of the other logs that we need to look at, that's some of the work that we're going to have to do to confirm and be able to go back and get a good sense of if there is any money owed back to the city from those contractors.
Okay, we'll give Councillor Fillion a turn.
And I have a lot of questions, so I may need a second round, and I may end up with questions that maybe need to be answered in camera. I don't know if there's any intention to go on camera on this item, but I think we might need to. I'm also aware there's a lot of people in the room, and I don't want to clear the room unnecessarily, so I'll see how I do with carefully worded public questions. Starting out with the audit staff, if you know the answer, perhaps forestry staff, if you don't, the number of forepersons.
My understanding is about 19 or 20.
And how many of these logs would they have to monitor in a day?
I'm not sure. There's probably about 50 crews, is that right?
Probably 20 to 30.
20 to 30 crews that they would have to look at, 20 to 30 crews.
So not much more than one crew to monitor per day per foreperson?
Yes, that would be.
Just to clarify, it's approximately 10 crews per foreman.
Okay.
10 crews, okay. So perhaps I'll ask you the same question. So then how many forepersons do we have and how many crews do we have?
So the auditor is correct on the number of forepersons. The total number of crews on any given day is roughly 93 and approximately 17 in-house crews.
So 93 crews
Plus
on a
7.
given day. So each person would need to, by my math, monitor roughly 5. That's combined internal and contract, right?
That
I'm
would
just
be correct.
dividing
There are times when
93
there are
by-
additional crews. That's not a consistent number every day, but that's approximately correct.
So it's roughly about 5. Okay. And how long would someone spend on this monitoring? So you got 5 of these logs for one person to monitor. How much time would they be expected to spend on each one?
It depends on the complexity of the day. It depends on the number of storm calls that are being responded to. It depends on the detail associated with each crew. There's various activities that are performed by each crew, whether it be
So I'll ask it a different way. How much time would they have available to them to do what their job is supposed to be, which is to monitor the logs?
They have available to them at least an hour or so per day in the morning and in the afternoon.
So 2 hours a day?
It varies according to the crew and varies according to the district.
Roughly. So roughly 2 hours to monitor 5 logs, roughly?
Roughly. That's a ballpark.
Okay. I understand things. We're dealing with averages, that things could vary by day and by, what's going on that day. So back to the Auditor General staff, did you notice patterns with certain, based on who the contractor was or based on who the foreperson was, or were you not looking for that?
So we haven't gone to that level of detail yet. We haven't completed all work on these contracts. What I can say is we did notice a pattern that the inspections were done in the morning and it seemed like the issues occurred more later in the day, in the afternoon. So that's the pattern we saw, but we didn't triangulate that to a foreperson or a contractor. We took a sample across the board of the contractors that we had. We had to exclude one contractor for reliability of some of the information we were concerned. So we had 2 contractors left, and it was across the board. So that's where that is.
So I'm just going to, and so I'm just going to ask, I was puzzled by that. The information wasn't reliable enough for you to do an assessment. Is that the information that the city had was not reliable enough, or the contractor was not cooperative? I didn't understand that point.
We had information from the contractor, but the locations appear to be more erratic, and I wouldn't use data that I didn't feel was consistent. So I just wanted to exclude that so that I wouldn't skew the record to be worse than what it already is. I wanted to be conservative on what we found.
Is that a separate area of concern, that the information from one of 3 contractors was unreliable for you to audit or monitor?
It just, I think the theory here is nothing that's skullduggery on that aspect. I think what's important is that the city obtain the information in a consistent format from all contractors. That's what's important around that. That's what I felt. For the information to be usable in the most simplistic way, it should come in one format. I also thought that as we move forward, you can have GPS on a vehicle, and if you can get the city's GPS on these vehicles that are used for 8 hours of the day, and on your computer screen, you simply draw a fence around where they're supposed to be, and if they go outside the fence, it brings an alarm, so a question can be asked. You can live watch the 10 teams moving around during the day if you needed to. So there's technology available that can help on a real-time basis to ask some questions.
Okay, so where you observed, so when someone wasn't where they were supposed to be, sometimes it was a coffee shop, sometimes it was a plaza, and then sometimes it appeared to be at someone else's home other than, like, at a residence, like stopped on a street in front of somebody's house?
Yes, there are points that should be questioned. There are entries that should be questioned.
And
So Councillor Fillion, I just wondered if we could give Councillor Nunziata a turn, and then we'll come back. I know you've got a few, but we'll try to rotate them through the committee members. I know I've got some as well.
Sure. So, how long has this been going on? Do we know? We don't?
We don't, no.
Okay, so am I correct to say then GPS is just on the contractors' vehicles, not on the city vehicles? So we don't know, we have no idea about what the city vehicles are doing.
Correct.
So that could even be more.
Yeah, I mean, the city, you
Right?
should monitor both groups.
Yeah, so we don't. Okay, so.
Even for coordination purposes, so that you make sure that
Yeah.
coordinating. Mhm.
So, has this been brought forward to the contractor? Like, if they know we can track them down with GPS, they're aware of it, which I'm surprised, and they do it. But has it been brought to their attention, or maybe they continue doing it because we haven't said anything?
Through the chair, it's been brought to their attention, and there are ongoing discussions with all 3 of the contractors that are involved in this report.
But just now, though, after the audit, but before the audit?
To the extent that has been put forward in the audit, many of those items are with those contractors now for review, and there's a number of steps we're already considering taking around how to get better compliance reports on the GPS logs.
Madam Auditor, you indicated
Yes, I just wanted to make one clarity to Councillor Fillion's point. The contractor A, I understand that it was they moved to a different system, so it was a system issue. It wasn't anything that we were concerned about.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, so So they submit in invoices, so we don't have like one blanket contract with this contractor. We get individual invoices with their hours, and that's how they get paid?
Through the chair, I'll ask
Okay.
Mr. Bowen to correct me if I'm wrong, but the daily logbook serves as a work verification system for the day. So based on the daily logbook, that is how the contractor's invoices are then processed.
Right, and they send out invoices, what, monthly or yearly? How is that paid?
I believe it's based on weekly packages. That may vary. Weekly packages of work.
So they send invoices to us weekly?
On a routine basis. I'm not exactly sure on what the period of time.
Okay. In the report on page 27, it says that in 2018, Urban Forestry paid about $60,000 for related towing costs, and the owners of the parked vehicles are not charged for the towing costs. Why would we be towing? Like, what's that all about?
Through the chair, we're towing vehicles to get access to trees to perform either the pruning or the removal or the stumping activities.
So are these vehicles that are the owner's vehicles that where you're going to maintain the tree? Or like, I didn't know we were towing cars to prune trees. This is the first I've heard of this.
Yeah, in certain densities of the city, roadways are quite narrow, and forestry vehicles and equipment can take up a lot of space, and so further access is required using the right-of-way, and so cars that are legally parked need to be removed temporarily.
So we're removing them, and it's cost us $60,000, and we're not getting reimbursed for any of that?
Through the chair, these are for legally parked vehicles. They're not illegally parked. It's a question on whether we charge back a legally parked property owner's vehicle. I think that's a question of fairness.
Okay, no, that's it for my question.
Thank you. I've got a couple of my own. If I get the clock to work. Can staff describe to me, how is a crew formed? Are they the same people each day? Do they stick together for months, years on end, or does it rotate around?
It does rotate around. The crew type is dependent upon the type of activity that they're performing. So you can have a two-man stumping crew that has 2 people involved with the appropriate equipment, or you can have a larger tree removal crew that might involve 4 or more people.
Day in and day out, though, do the same pairs of people go out together, or is there some deeper rotation? I'm an expert in this type of thing, and today I work with Joe, and next day I work with Sally, and then Peter, and then somebody else, or are things fairly consistent or habitual in the way things are worked out?
Things are fairly consistent. There is some rotation on on which crews are working in which locations of the city. It's the contractor that determines which personnel are attached to which crew leader.
Same thing for the internal crews? Same pattern? Or is it different than the contractor?
Internal crews would be the same on a day-to-day basis. They would have less fluctuation or flexibility than the contractor crew.
How about the relationship between the supervisor and the crew? Do the crews hop between different supervisors or different districts? Do the supervisors work in different parts of the city, move around constantly, or is things fairly static?
Supervisors are fairly static. There was some rotation based on the new ward model that was in place last year. The crew type and the crew volume also is dependent upon where the need is to perform forestry services, where our core work is required, where a storm may have passed through, causing significant damage, requiring more crews to be allocated.
How about movement from employment with the contractor to the city, or vice versa? Worked for the city for a long time, left the city, went to work for the contractor. Do you see a high amount of crossover? Are we talking about the same people? And what I'm getting at is forestry a fairly limited industry in that there's only so many people that have the skills and they tend to move around?
Through the chair, it is a fairly limited industry. It's a highly skilled industry, a lot of training involved. And so the staff tend to stick with it for quite a while, and there is some movement from time to time. There used to be a lot more than there is now. Private companies tend to have come along with benefits and things like that for their employees to help the retention rates. But there is always some movement.
And is this an industry where individuals, in general, work most of their life? Or do they tend to work a stage of their life and then go do something else? And what I'm getting at are, are your crews people that do this for decades on end?
Yes.
Okay. Let's take the GPS data aside. How does a supervisor know, looking at a daily log, that the crew has had a productive day? We're looking at an example on the screen here. It looks like they trimmed 2 trees. How do they know, that was time well spent? Those were tough jobs, they took all day, or, boy, day after day, this crew seems to get like one thing done, and I'm not satisfied with the level of work. Just never mind the GPS, just the outcomes.
So forestry sets up targets on a yearly basis that's broken down, and supervisors are attempting to achieve those targets on a routine basis.
We see a disparity in the data presented by the auditor in terms of the inspections from district to district. Do you see a disparity between crews under one supervisor? In other words, and that's why I was asking you the questions about, do people move around? Do some crews perform better than others? These are our superstars, they do the work of 5. And how do you manage that within, GPS data aside, just we come back to the yard at the end of the day, what did you accomplish? This crew did amazing things, this crew did not, and how is that dealt with?
So the year in which we're examining is in 2018. The number of storm calls that we had received in this given year was over double the number in previous years. I'm not saying there may be an issue with respect to the number of performance and inspection reports that are being completed, but it is highly variable based on the region and the supervisor and the number of crews available to them. Forestry meets on a consistent basis, going through the number of crews that are available, what the backlogs are across the city, and tries to balance those things out as best it can.
Thank you. Councillor Fillion, you'd indicated a desire for additional questions. With the consent of the committee, we'll take those.
Thank you. Going back to the number of people on a crew, so it's a lead person, and is that right? There's a lead person on each crew?
A crew leader.
Crew leader, and then there's how many other people?
It can vary based on the activity.
But roughly, what's the range?
So there's 2-person crews, and their removal crews can be 4 people plus the crew leader and up.
Okay, so the leader plus between 2 and 6 or something? Okay. I guess, back to the Auditor General, so there's cases where the vehicle would be stopped in front of private residences, is that correct? And was that for a period of time that would be consistent with somebody doing some tree work at that location, just not with a city tree that they were assigned to do?
We did a minute-by-minute analysis, but I think what you're wanting to do is a forensic analysis here, and I don't know if we'd have to go back and look at each location. We just showed the stop times, and we have the amount of time at each location, and there are some that should be questions.
Looked at further, you're suggesting, okay. And do you have the ability to get the information to look at those further?
It's my view that it starts with the contractor reconciling. The four-person, your control in the city is the four-person who should be doing these matches. And that should happen to see why it's out. And then we can go in and do, investigative work. But I think that we need to get at the bottom to fix the system here.
Back to Forestry staff, and then I need enough time to go back to the Auditor General. So the GPS system was put in when?
So the GPS system in the contractor vehicles?
Yes.
We would have to go back and review each contract prior to 2017, but certainly these were required in 2018.
And why were they required?
The GPS system is required to track and create records according to where, vehicles are located.
So someone in management made a conscious decision, we're going to require these GPS systems in place so that we could monitor what the vehicles were doing, where they were going. I assume that's what...
That's correct.
So then that appears not to have happened. So can you explain why we would insist on, require a GPS system and then not, apparently not use it?
So through the chair, we don't have real-time access to the GPS, so the process that is in place is that if there is a questionable log that is submitted, the city would then request from the contractor the GPS log for that day, and then we would review it and against the daily log. So it's not an immediate response, and it's based on, on errors that come forward that we've identified. There have been a few occasions where we have done that, but clearly through the Auditor General's report, it's something that we have now acknowledged needs to be done on a more consistent basis, and also needs to be done by the contractor before they submit the daily log. So what we're looking at now
And I appreciate the acknowledgement, but it sounds like there is no explanation.
Sorry, can you repeat?
It sounds like there is no explanation for why we would require that the system be put into place and then not have a system to use it.
So Urban Forestry did perform internal audits of GPS and daily activities on a small scale in 2018, and those were brought to the attention of the contractors.
And what did you find with your own internal? Did they match what the Auditor General found?
No, there wasn't a perfect match with what the Auditor General found. There was a smaller number of vehicles that were not in locations on the daily activity log.
Like not even remotely similar? Can we, would we be able to get copies of those findings?
Yes, those copies can be made available to you, yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to request that through you, Mr. Chair. I don't know that we need a motion for it. The Auditor General reported that in 41% of cases there appeared to be something wrong on the log. So do you have any, first of all, do you agree with that? And if you do agree with it, how would you explain that high a percentage and nobody's noticing it?
So the discrepancies that were noted by the Auditor General's office, they vary in magnitude in terms of their importance on the log. In some cases, the discrepancy was associated with an incorrect tree number or a missing work order number, which doesn't necessarily constitute any financial cost to the city. It's a vestige of the paper-based system that Forestry is currently using to track its work. Since 2015, Forestry has been working with the Enterprise Work Management System to develop a system that moves us from a paper-based system into an electronic system. where crews and supervisors and forepersons can monitor and track daily work in real time as opposed to via paper-based systems.
I'm conscious of the time, Mr. Chair, so I'll just go back. And hopefully this will answer my questions, so I don't need to go in camera because I don't want to disrupt the meeting. But I know my understanding is that there are legal limits to what your findings can be used for, and that's on a general basis, not just in this case, but in general, if I got that right?
I'd just like to go back to a couple of comments, just if I could, just.
Yes.
The logs, at least in one case, the GPS can show when a hydraulic system is being used to prune a tree. And we've seen the hydraulic system being used to prune trees that were not on the work order and were associated potentially with other addresses. So I just want to make sure that it's not a work order number that we're seeing that's incorrect. There might be a few of those, but we would see something like, they said they left the tree location at 12:30. And, I'm just sorry, they said that they left the last location at, say, 12:30, and then they would record, GPS says 12:30, they record, they stay there till 2:30. So we're seeing big differences in time. It's not like a work order number, a tree that's missed. We do see difference in time. There may be an explanation for that, but it's concerning that we see the hydraulic in other areas. Around our findings, the city has to conduct its own work, and legal services is here. Our findings are based on the work that we do, but I have special powers to obtain records, and so really, it's really for the city to go back, take the daily log, match it to the GPS, identify when the hydraulic's being used. If you don't have that information, that should be getting it. Match it up, and where there are discrepancies of an hour or 2 hours, then I think it's important to ask those questions.
So on a really broad basis, not just on this file, can your findings be used in legal proceedings or in criminal proceedings, or does someone else have to then go and do the same work for that information to be used in those types of proceedings?
So in criminal proceedings, my records can be obtained under a search order or a production order, and that has happened in the past. In civil proceedings, the city has to prepare its own case, so you can't take my work that I have special powers to obtain information and then use that in court. But you have a roadmap here of what the issues are and the time. An overview of what's happening here has been provided. It is a guide, and now it's a matter of matching the data. And over to maybe Rod Blake, he's the lawyer on the file.
Yes, so I'm not sure, I'll take your guidance, Mr. Chair, on whether or not we can delve into that aspect of this, or I'm trying to be cautious and.
Yeah, and I think you've got the committee members to deal with if you want to go deeper into in-camera questions on that. I would also point out that there will be a time gap between now and council where we could add on additional at council. I guess it's up to the committee if we want to.
I'm not wanting to ask more questions. The committee's been very generous with, I think I've gone over 15 minutes, but what I'm looking, I guess, to you for is there if one thinks there needs to be further investigation, and perhaps not only by the Auditor General, and that perhaps by council we're going to need something in camera on those issues, do you have a motion or a plan to deal with that?
I know we're splitting from procedure here, but I would say I've got a couple of basic motions that respond to the mayor's request to look back in farther detail regarding the contracts, and to also have a follow-up report. That should be no surprise, but if you had something more specific you want to look at, I would recommend that we place a motion here and now, or place a motion at council if you need time to develop it.
Yes, well, I don't know what your motions are, so.
Happy to show you a copy. Councillor Nunziata, you had some follow-up questions, and
couple
maybe in that
questions, yeah.
time we can.
The chair has a motion, so I think it address. Have we been using, how long have we been using this contractor? The same one?
Through the chair, these contractors have been in use by all of the former City of Toronto municipalities for decades.
Oh, for decades. Wow, go back, must be millions of dollars.
Should also note, just to add, there are 3 contractors that are referenced in this report.
Now, just a question, this is my last question. So do we pay the contractor on the number of trees that they've gone out to maintain and watered and pruned, or do we just send them out for the day and they get paid daily? Do we have a list of all the locations they have to go to, and then do we review that and ensure that whatever list they've had for the day has been done? So we know that we're paying them, right?
So a couple points is we do pay the contractor based, oh, sorry. We do, thanks. We do pay the contractor based on the day. However, Urban Forestry is exploring unit rate contracts in 2019. There is one already set up to start this May on watering trees, and also one starting in October this year on stumping. A unit rate contract differs from an hourly rate contract in that the work is based upon the number of units produced, the number of trees pruned, or the number of trees watered, as opposed to based on the hourly rate.
Looking at that for this year. Okay.
Yes. So
Now, just to staff, for years, we've been told, the council's been told to tell our constituents, when they call in to get their tree pruned, we tell them, oh, it takes 9 months, it could be a year, it could be 2 years before they get their tree pruned. Could this not be what's happening here today? Like, here we are, and we have people that are waiting for months to get their tree pruned. In the meantime, we're paying people when they're not even doing their pruning.
So through the chair and through the results of the audit report and some of the things that we're currently doing to improve this process, I agree with you. If there are ways to create greater efficiencies and prune more trees in a timely manner, that's certainly something that we're committed to doing.
So I also had a follow-up question. Madam Auditor, if I could ask you just to articulate or go a bit deeper. In your answer, an earlier answer, you had mentioned that the GPS logs contain data on the use of the hydraulic equipment, and that the logs indicated that the trucks were operating at locations that weren't locations of the work order. So they were, let's say, plain as can be, they were trimming trees that weren't on the list. Did I get that right? I didn't detect that in the report. It might be in there somewhere, but that's kind of a new piece. Did I understand that correctly, or is there any additional information to add on that?
Not everything goes to the report. We have mounds of information, but you are correct. There is at least one contractor who does have that kind of information. I think it's useful information. If you were going to track by hour, it's useful information to have to show that the work has been done, even with the, even if you're tracking by unit, to know that the hydraulic has gone up and down. And we did see from the information we had that it was at a location that was not on the daily log.
Okay, was it an isolated circumstance, or was there a pattern in that type of experience that you found in the?
We only looked at a few, 132 items. Just want to make sure, 132 samples. So it's not enough to draw any kind of conclusion, but we could see that there were some questions that we would have asked.
In your opinion of your recommendations and the powers that you have and the powers that staff have, do you believe that there's enough before this committee to give you and the city department authority to dig deeper into those circumstances, to get really deep into exactly what happened. Can we get pictures of the trees before and after? Can we knock on the door of the person that lives there and find out what happened? You know, was this a simple customer service issue? Hey, you're cutting the tree, can you fix this hanging limb, versus something else?
So your idea around a picture and before and after, that can be part of our work order and integrated, so you can see the tree before, you can see it after. I think that's a go-forward kind of thing. Around digging deeper in any of these areas, it's a function of time for us. You know, this is a responsibility of the city, of the Forestry Division. I think they should at least look at it first and identify where they have concerns, and so the contractor knows. The contractor should do some work too. But for us to dig deeper, we would have to be pulled off another project, and it becomes challenging. But if the City Council would like me to do that, I would need a two-third vote, and I would certainly do that.
So I'm going to shift it over to the Forestry Department. So we have an example of something that is deeply concerning. Have you got the tools before you in this report to go and deal with a circumstance like that and anything else that may come up in any reviews that you've got to get really deep? It is, in my opinion, this is beyond just the management of the contract situation and performance. This is, why were you working on a tree we didn't ask you to?
Certainly through.
Do you need anything
Through the
from
chair,
us?
You are the chair. I think we have enough information, as the Auditor General has indicated, to delve deep into all of the items that have come up, including the use of hydraulics in addresses that were not part of the daily work order. Some of that information is new to us today, so
Sure.
I think that's the kind of information we will be going back to all of these contractors with, and coming up with a process to confirm that all of the daily logs are representative of the work that was actually done and the payments that have been made.
Could I leave it as an undertaking that between now and council, that if staff felt that you needed additional direction or authority or support from us, that you could approach members of audit? We'd see if we could take care of that when this matter comes to council.
I can say, it's certainly, we're following up on all of these items, and as I indicated earlier, we've already had preliminary discussions with these three contractors around some of the work that will need to happen going forward.
Thank you.
Yes.
Were there any further questions? Members of the committee wishing to speak? Actually, I am going to express an interest to speak first, although I will be brief. Exactly. If I could have the clerks show the two motions that I have. Thank you. And I'll take a moment to acknowledge and thank the mayor for taking an interest in this. He did submit a letter before committee outlining, I think, things that we as committee members would have also understood and expected as we read this report with outrage. So the first is, and I'll paraphrase the motion, of course, that we take a look back and find out if there is some legal action or recourse that we can take, and also look forward about ways of performance managing this vendor or set of vendors. And the second is I would like, as a committee member, and I hope you share with me, a follow-up report in a year to see that things have changed. And I had heard comments before from Forestry that they are well underway with a transformation on this. That is exceptionally important. As we all know as councillors, that's one of the common service request complaints we get. It takes so long to get a tree serviced. Yeah. And I understand the report does say, look, we met our standards in many, many cases, but the standard is really long. So if we are able to find efficiencies in the system and close those standards and get better service for citizens of the city, I think people would be delighted in that. So I hope you'll support these motions. And Councillor Fillion, did you have a question for me?
Given that some of the fixes seem pretty obvious, could we not have a report back sooner than a year? Seems like a long time to wait for an update on a matter like this.
I would be happy to take an amendment that would ask for this or a subsequent report. I just want to make sure they have enough time to implement some of the changes, but I take your point.
Like a status report, but I
Happy-
understand everything might not be implemented, but could we say fourth quarter of 2019?
As an interim status report, staff are not smiling, but they're saying yes. And if we could ask the clerk to add that, I'm happy to take that
Okay,
suggestion.
Thank you.
That's all I wanted to say. Did anyone else want to speak to this matter? Councillor Filion, Councillor Nunziata be next. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll, you know, I could say a lot or a little. I guess I'll say a little. You know, because we get a lot of troubling reports here, but this one has aspects to it that are a little bit more troubling. I think we have a snapshot of what's been happening here. We don't have a full picture, and so I think we need the full picture, however one might get it. So acknowledging there are problems and taking corrective measures, that's great. That deals with you know, ongoing, going forward, dealing with that. And with most of the Auditor General's reports, I would say that's kind of our main job there, is just to make sure that going forward, whatever she's identified is fixed. With this one, I think we do need to bring the picture more into focus. We need to verify the extent to which what appears to be going on was going on, and I think we need to know how and why it happened. And it could be the usual, you know, lack of oversight, whatever, or it could be more than that. And I think we do need to get to the bottom of that.
Thank you, Councillor Filion. Councillor Nunziata?
Yes, thank you. Just briefly, and I will be supporting the chair's motions. And as you can see, the letter that we received from the mayor has definitely concerns on the report. My motion. I have a motion that City Council direct the General Manager, Parks, Forestry, and Recreation to investigate, report back on the feasibility of coordinating tree maintenance with Toronto Hydro and leveraging their best practices. The reason I'm moving that is because then we used to contract, not maybe with the City of Toronto, but when we were York, we used to contract with Toronto, with Hydro, because they go around pruning trees as well for their own. And so possibly there's a possibility that we might be able to look at and maybe work with them in partnership. I don't know, but I'm just asking for a report. I mean, maybe it's not possible, I don't know, but I'd just like to move that. And I'm looking forward to staff bringing back, looking and reviewing the length of time for tree pruning and maintenance, because I can tell you that's one of the biggest issues that we get from residents. And now that you got this report here today, I'm sure we're going to get calls from residents saying, okay, yeah, it takes this long because of, you know. So I'm looking forward to that report. And thank you to the Auditor General. And that's it for me.
Councillor Matlow, I do note we've lost the clocks, but
Well,
we'll make do.
please excuse my 4-hour speech. I'll truncate it.
Follow you with Swiss time.
Yeah, I mean, imagine you hired somebody to come and paint your house, and they double billed you for the same wall. They billed you for 8 hours work and spent, 3 hours of it at Starbucks having coffee, or your neighbor's wall. And meanwhile, the bills keep coming in, and meanwhile, the wall, most of your walls aren't painted yet, and other customers are waiting for that painter to arrive. I mean, this is what happened to the city of Toronto. We got, you know, we're getting, this was an abuse of trust. It was abuse of trust on our contract. It was an abuse of trust to residents who pay taxes that pay these bills. And I commend the Auditor General and her team for bringing this to our attention and, you know, once again, recommending both accountability measures, but also move forward measures for staff to adopt. But it's, you know, John, Councillor Fillion mentioned this earlier, and I just can't agree with him more. And I've found this over and over and over again in this committee. I know all of you have, where there's just some things that come to us that just seem sort of glaringly obvious. And I just don't understand why these things have been allowed in the first place. If you know that your vehicle has a GPS, bless you, and you're being tracked from a satellite in space, and you're supposed to be somewhere doing a job, and you then think that you can go and hang out for 2 hours at a coffee shop or whatever they're doing at the mall, whatever. It's just amazing. But then what really amazes me is that when they go to whoever their boss is at this company that we've contracted, that they don't go, hey, wait a sec, Bob, you're not allowed to do that. And we need to talk to the city and talk to management about what we've discovered. And now that all of this has been discovered, there's no evidence in front of us that there's been any accountability or any consequence. Anyone's been fired, anyone has been given a scolding. I haven't seen anything come out of this other than now it's at our attention. So I completely agree that we need to go take a look at what's happened. We need to review this. There needs to be accountability. And frankly, if this company has not been doing their job and keeping their own workers to account, this company shouldn't be working with the City of Toronto, and they should never get another dime of taxpayers' money. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Matlow. I think we've covered all the committee members. So with that, I've got 2 amendments. Hope you'll support those all in favor. Any opposed? Those are carried. Councillor Nunziata had an amendment. All those in favor? That is carried. And on the item as amended, all those in favor? That is carried. Our final item is item 2.6. Correct. Councillor Ford did hold that item. He is not here for that. So that, I'll read the item. Auditor General's response to the Audit Committee's request on outstanding audit recommendations which are of greatest concern. Are there questions of staff? Of course. So, yeah, regrettably, that message didn't come through. Did we need to do a reopening with that? I realized you didn't come in right off the top there on the meeting. That I never got. Bad reception in this room. Do you need us to reopen 2.7? Like if you've got a motion on that, or did you want a question on it? Okay. So 2.6, do you have questions of staff?
I don't need to read it out, I don't think, do I? So, do I need to read it out? Mr.
I think we're
Chair, just
good.
give an explanation.
Yep.
Okay, so
Straightforward, report back.
as we have seen here, sometimes things go amiss, and I think what we're, one of the main roles of this committee is to ensure accountability in the system. So we're very fortunate to have Auditor General who brings things to our attention. Then the various divisions say, almost always say, yeah, okay, acknowledged, we're going to fix it. Then I think it's incumbent on us to go back and look at, so did they fix it? Did they do what they said they were going to do? That's part of our oversight and accountability requirement. So At the last meeting, I asked the Auditor General to come forward with cases where that hasn't happened, which were of greatest concern to her. So I picked out 3 of those that were of greatest concern to me among the list that were of greatest concern to her. The first has to do with cleaning, and it's just an efficiency and cost savings one that seems like one of those ones. The solutions are pretty obvious. Maybe they've happened already. They don't appear to have, so we'd need to know why. The IT issue, as I don't know how many of us have taken the director's education program, but there was, 1 day spent on cybersecurity threats that just scared the heck out of everybody in the room. And I think we really need to know in some detail. Again, major part of our oversight is to make sure that we have the proper systems in place there. And then the third is employee benefits, and I don't know to what extent some of those were resolved with the change in carriers, but it's still outstanding, and that was a very high-profile report that, so I think we need to revisit those 3, and then what I'm asking in recommendation 2 is, just as a good practice, we continue to have the Auditor General bring forward a list of ones that are outstanding that she has concerns about, and then we may, if we choose, continue to ask people to come and report back to us. And also, hopefully, by having that kind of a list and show that somebody's following up on the follow-up, we may get better follow-up. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fillion. So on Councillor Fillion's amendment, all those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. On the item as amended, all those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. I believe that is our last item. Thank you. Motion to adjourn. That is carried.